Part 1. London Deadzone. Pinpricks of cold every couple of seconds. That's how it always starts, Alex thought. Then London's freezing rain would begin to sheet down. He didn't mind. He enjoyed the chilly weather. It beat the dust and heat of New Purgatory. The cold helped Alex focus, which is what he needed out in a dead zone with next to no life around him. Westminster hadn't changed much in a year. The streets were still rampant with drug-addled rovers that ignored him for the most part. The weather remained dour, especially now in December, and remnants of his old deceased friend Dellen Johnston's refugee group were still finding their way in this crippled part of the world. Alex hadn't come here to find people to aid in his fight, though. He came here to pay his respects to Layla, in the only place he knew where it would mean a damn. New Purgatory was her adopted home, but this was where she was born. This was the place she had fled before the war. Layla. Alex had no issue finding his way back to her childhood home. In only a year, the bodies of all the rovers he and his team had killed to get there were gone, washed away by the rain or taken away by other rovers. The only reminder he had ever been here were numerous holes where bullets had collided with the walls of the ground. He stood on the empty street, looking around. He saw the storefront Layla and he had hidden in, away from the rovers, and a Morrison hellchopper. She made her hands bleed from clutching the rocks and dirt in that place. She was so scared. And so were you. You just ignored it, so she would feel safe. Strange how that switches on you. How you wish she was here to comfort you. He had to force himself to look away from the shop and continue down the road whose name he had forgotten. The names didn't matter, just the landmarks. The rain fell on his jacket and hood as he trudged on. His boots were filling up with water, making the walk worse. After some time, he finally reached it. Layla had told him the place was once called the Dacker House. Alex wondered why the rovers didn't use the building like they had the others. He supposed it might have been because all the doors to the various apartments inside were locked. When he reached Layla's family door, he lifted his rifle and smashed the butt of the knob. It popped off and Alex pushed the door open. Her house hadn't changed much, not that it would have. The smell of stale mold that permeated from the walls, floor, and furniture was still there. Water was leaking from the top floor, and it sprayed in from the broken windows. He reached a hand up to his face and touched the water running down it. He was unsure if it was from the rain or his own tears. Did I really want to come back here? The epicenter of all the bullshit, all the pain, all the hatred I have in my heart where hope used to be. The last time he was here, he had been helping Layla put the memory of her parents to rest. Now he was here trying to put his memory of her to rest. He knew it wasn't that simple, but he had to try. Alex had lost Elias, and that almost broke him. Losing Layla had pushed him beyond that point. He was traveling paths now that were far away from the man he used to be. He recognized that. Layla recognized it first. She wanted out of war and death. She wanted you out of it. You should have stayed in California, but you couldn't, could you? You went from Sentinel to Reaper, like they all said you would. Alex moved to Layla's childhood room and sat on her bed. He looked at the child-sized desk, the dresser, and the closet. She had explained that this is where she studied, that she had been a bright child. Her parents had pushed her hard and sent her away because they saw the war coming. It was a school trip to visit the United States, New York of all places. When the bombs fell, she was safely shielded while her parents died. Alex wished she was here as he looked around her room. He wanted her to tell him all the stories he never had a chance to hear. He pulled off his backpack and set it between his feet, and then reached down and grabbed a single earring Layla had left on their nightstand back in New Purgatory. It was all that was left of Layla Lansfield. No more stories, no more love, no more care. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. She was always supposed to be here. They would get away and escape the life of war, away from conflict and death. Alex had failed her in that. He might as well have driven the knife into her body that killed her. He had lied repeatedly about ending his fight and finally ran out of time. He stared at the earring for a few moments before standing up and opening Layla's desk. The inside was bare, so that's where he placed it. Alex looked at it a moment longer before closing the drawer. I'm sorry, Layla. I wish I had been better. I wish I had been able to walk away, he said aloud. Between the times when his head talked to him, he spent the other amount of time talking to himself. No one else is around. What the hell do I care? She always said she left some of herself here. Truer than ever now. He let out a sigh. He needed a smoke, but had more respect than to do it in Layla's home. He didn't want to leave, he felt drawn to stay. But the longer he did, the more he was worried he might attempt something drastic in his sorrow. Alex took a final look around as he went to exit Layla's room, and then closed the door behind him. There was no reason for him to stay here now. No reason for him to come back to London ever again. He left her home, closing the front door for no real reason. When Alex got outside, he reached into his coat for the half-empty pack of cigarettes he'd found in a blown-out store. He lit a match off his boot heel and tried to keep the cig dry under an overhang. The rain was splashing up from the ground now. Hell of a storm. Alex took a long drag, letting some smoke billow from his mouth before he breathed it back in. Just beyond the sound of rain, he heard footsteps, heavy, splashing the groundwater. There were rovers around, and he knew they could see him. Alex propped his rifle up in one hand and pulled a cigarette out of his mouth with the other. For now they just watched, likely twitching and shaking in the rain. Alex wondered how they had survived so long in conditions like these with next to no clothing and food that came from eating each other. Alex flicked the cigarette in the wind and watched two rovers react. He ran a hand through his beard he hadn't shaved in months. They started towards him, but Alex didn't give them the chance to attack. He put 2 rounds in each of the rovers' heads and they fell. The headshot, he remembered, was the easiest way to bring them down. Rover's drug and radiation mixed madness might as well have left them immune to pain, or at least the normal response to being hit by a bullet in a limb. His team had learned that the hard way, watching the ones with shot-up stomachs and knees continue to crawl towards them. It was a harrowing sight, one Alex didn't prefer to see again. So he tried to be as humane as possible, ending the rovers with a single shot each. It was time to move on. Even the slightest sounds could set off a pack of rovers into a crazed frenzy that he would not be able to handle alone. He pulled his hood up over his head and moved out into the rain. Alex's boots splashed with each step. His feet were freezing from the icy water that had drenched his socks. The breeze was getting colder, making his nose drip. Alex needed to find shelter quickly. He didn't want to die because of the weather or being mauled to death by rovers. How would you like to die? Back in the tower, in Beijing's Cloudbreaker reactor instead of Talia, being stabbed by the shadow instead of watching Layla bleed out slowly? Good point. He headed back the way he came, towards the outside of Westminster. He was too far away to make it back to his hell chopper before freezing to death. Water was seeping through his jacket and onto his back, so he ran for another awning. He was stuck out in the open. All the buildings he could see were smashed and filled with water that would make sustaining a fire impossible. For whatever reason, he reached down for the tags around his neck, fishing them out of his shirt. It was heavier now with 4 pieces of metal slung around the chain. The first was a dog tag with the symbol of the Crusaders. It was etched with the name Sentinel. The next tag was a rugged shield with a red circle in the center, but it was unetched. He didn't need a reiteration of the name that would become the origin for the Sentinels. The last 2 were the same as the first 2. The silver cross was etched with the name Exile. Layla's call sign was her history. Her last tag, the shield, had been etched by Alex using the knife he had taken from Mikhail. Release. She'd finally been given an escape from this world, and Alex needed to reflect that message for his own sake. Her fall had led to his perdition. He wanted that reminder every day. He needed to remember the brutality of her death and who was responsible. It was more fuel for the fire. The knife helped in that remembrance. He reached to his side and pulled the blade from its leather sheath. It was a long survival knife, sharp on one end and serrated on the other. This was the tool Mikhail had used on Layla and so many others. The shadow had left it inside of her. Just looking at it made the anger rise in his chest. He needed that anger now. It warmed him up, even with the freezing rain and rolling fog. It's not fog. It's moving. It's rising. That's smoke. A camp. Alex moved back into the pouring rain, racing for it. There hadn't been any survivor camps in London the last time he was here. Yeah, this one rivaled some he had seen out in New Purgatory's wastes. It could have been a soccer field, but the fencing was replaced by slabs of scavenged metal, building materials, and vehicles. Alex could only assume that the massive wall stretched all the way around the field. He didn't expect the 3 men on top of the wall, aiming down on him with their rifles. Mikhail Koslov sat on the roof of Thomas Beruger's laboratory, as he often did in the late hours of the evening. This was his free time, the most peaceful part of his new existence in his work for Thomas Beruger. While it was true that the scientist had restored his old memory, Mikhail found the bits of his old life did not agree with his new mind. He was in a state of constant turmoil. The old soldier berated the Shadow for destroying the world, for betraying his friends, and for selling his soul to a devil worse than the scientists of his own country. Part of his mind hated himself for being persuaded down the easier path. Another reassured him for the choice he had made. That's where the disconnect lay. His new mind only cared about finding the old, and the old hated the new for what it had become. How could he be comfortable with emotions, knowing he had killed so many to regain the memories of a man that would have been disgusted by his actions? It was a breakdown he could never solve in all the evenings spent pondering, contemplating, and problem-solving. Mikhail was the Shadow, and he was the soldier that served in the Chechenian wars. Neither of those lives could understand the other. Murder is the easy choice. The choice that satisfies the mind and soul if one is not worried about their heart growing cold or being ostracized by others, he said aloud. Yet that path has only been reserved for 2 kinds of people in history: psychopaths and those who fight for country. Murder itself is a war crime, not a trade skill, not an ability to be harnessed and perfected until it is an art form. He hadn't created that lengthy line of wisdom. Another soldier had told him that. Placing who it was in the vast memories of 2 lives, though, that was nearly impossible. He breathed in the cool, early morning air that encompassed Berlin. He could feel it in his lungs, no longer immune to it, and coughed. For the first time since he had retreated from Grozny, Mikhail Koslov, the man, not the Shadow, was afraid. Alexander would surely look for revenge. The Shadow knew this, because it was the same emotion he sought when he had been changed, the only emotion that powered through the reprogramming he had suffered through. The Shadow and Soldier knew firsthand what it meant to seek retribution in the name of the fallen, in the name of seemingly endless pain. Mikhail earned that vitriol, and he knew that no number of contemplative nights could solve the problem of the man who called himself a Crusader. War was waged until the last man fell. Alexander Velasco would take the world with him if it meant avenging the love Mikhail had severed with the thrust of a blade. Mikhail, you are needed. Mikhail recognized the voice over his comm. He was one of Beruger's augmented soldiers. Yet again he was called upon to serve. It was a far hope that his service would be ended soon. Mikhail knew all too well that the memories could be turned off at any time, and for Mikhail, even though he no longer wanted them, the thought of giving them all up for all he had sacrificed seemed an even greater crime. Beruger was in his office, and like so many days hunched over a computer looking at numbers and symbols scrolling past him. Mikhail never understood what the man was working on, even with the database. The Shadow imagined it was just readouts of the nearby reactor, or perhaps code to better control the augmented. It didn't matter, and Mikhail found himself ever more disinterested in Beruger, Berlin, and his war. Agent Koslov, Beruger said, without looking up or turning around. How are you this lovely evening? What do you have for me? Mikhail replied. That brought Beruger's eyes up. He spun his chair around and looked up at the Shadow. He studied him. The skin-tight suit developed by the Russians to harden on impact of small arms fire. His golden eyes that would shudder around his white pupils. The short-cut gray hair that indicated the former soldier's age. Mikhail stared right back at the portly scientist, whose receding white hair was only matched by the patchy gray beard that may as well have been glued onto the man's chubby face. The only intimidation Mikhail saw was in the cold blue eyes the scientist hid behind a set of circular glasses. Still all business, I see. Even after the gift I've given you. I don't understand how you can act so ungrateful. Beruger's voice was melancholy instead of disappointed. I will be grateful when my services to you have ended, Beruger. So I say again, what would you have me do? Beruger shook his head as he stood from his chair. I wonder why it is you are so eager to return to a life that no longer exists.
Tell me, Mikhail, because I am curious. You knew you would be lost. You would have the memories of being the shadow and the soldier. A man displaced in time and mind with nothing but torturous memories of the family you killed and what your own people did to you.
Mikhail moved an aggressive step towards Baruger, but the scientist took a step back and pressed a key to the computer. Mikhail's body froze. His arms were cramping worse than any gunshot wound he had ever sustained. All he wanted to do was reach over to Baruger and throttle the man's throat.
You will earn your freedom when you are no longer useful to me, Mikhail. Should you make it that far, or be lucky enough that I decide not to have you disposed of instead.
Baruger pressed another key, and the shadow's body was released. He fell to his knees and grasped at his arms. Baruger had complete control over him, and there was nothing Mikhail could do to stop that except follow the man's orders. He had traded the little freedom granted to him as the shadow for the memories of his old life. In that exchange, he had shackled his veins to a man he hated, a man that would make him kill more.
I can always give you more, Mikhail. Not just more pain, but I can also give you a complete reversal. Make you forget about the pain, about the man you became. Return you to that unknowing soldier, with only strange scars and an older body. But that requires you to follow my every word. Your defiance gives me little hope. Too much time around Alexander, I imagine. Even he wouldn't help you now.
I would rather go back to the shadow. Just the shadow, Mikhail said through stressed breaths.
That can also be accomplished, Koslov, but not without effort on your part.
Baruger sat back down in his chair.
As for your question, I want what I've always wanted, your former comrade dead. I want the rest of his team, the so-called Sentinels, Crusaders, whatever name they go by now, dead. Their presence on the council is an affront to everything I've accomplished. So to you I say, no more.
Mikhail did not nod at the man, say yes, or give Baruger any sort of affirmation that he had heard him. The scientist lifted a hand and hovered it over the keyboard once more. Fine, Mikhail shouted, his arms desperately reaching out to the out-of-reach man. I'll kill him as I killed her, and all the rest. Baruger rested his hand back on his lap and stared down at the groveling shadow.
Good boy. Do get started as soon as possible.
A question, Mikhail said as Baruger turned back around to his computer screen.
Yes, go on.
Why do they bother you so much? Is it Morrison, his father? Why do you want them dead? For fighting for their freedom? They could have worked with you. Instead, you tried to kill them and created an enemy. Baruger did not answer at first. He sat up straight, still staring into the code Mikhail found meaningless.
All this time, and you don't know or understand. How hard is it to see the madness in what they accomplished? The breakdown of a system that worked to be replaced with what? Chaos?
They've done well, Baruger, Mikhail responded. A year has passed since Morrison's death. They have an army, leadership, plumbing and electricity. All those things for everyone, not just the rich survivors in their ivory towers.
How poetic. I should have expected that from the soldier side of your mind. So full of idealism that it overrides the murdering assassin. I dare say that he would have liked Alexander better than the shadow.
Baruger spat. You are evading, Mikhail replied.
There is but one truth in this new world, Mikhail. There will always be refugees, those who want. Morrison simply tried to do what I had already accomplished here. Pacify his country so he could continue with the real work. But his methods were more primal, all that murder. But I never blamed him for his anger after his father was murdered. That revenge led to his failure.
And all the Europeans who rushed for Berlin.
I offered a simple trade, labor or death. A man must get his soldiers from somewhere after all. Many were eager to earn their way to a new home. Few needed the kind of culling John Morrison committed.
But you experimented on them, Mikhail said. They are your augmented.
Correct. Never a more loyal force have I had. Just like you,
Baruger said with a proud smile.
How can you not call yourself a monster? They volunteered, and you re-engineered their souls, turned them into twisted creatures, incapable of deciding if that was a path they wanted to take. You never gave them the whole picture, Mikhail argued. Beruger, in anger, spun his chair around and slammed a hand on the keyboard. All the muscles in Mikhail's body tensed up again. But of course, there is no more old world. You ensured that. If several thousand people must exist in a state of animation to ensure thousands more might live in peace and never experience death on the scale of billions, I will make that sacrifice, and I will sleep soundly at night for it. There is only one murderer in this room, Koslov. You would do well to remember that. By the end of his speech, Beruger's face had turned red, and he was nearly out of breath, but he began to calm down. For a few moments, he watched the shadow's body twitch, and then released the key to his computer. Mikhail fell from his knees to the floor. He had passed out. Thomas Beruger let out a sigh, then reached for his phone. Operator, medic to my lab, now, please. Shaylee Ferris was sitting in Alonsfo's bar at one of the booths as many of her friends had done before. She was sipping a martini, alone. She was people-watching, as she often did when she found herself in the bar. It was most of her interaction with other people since the Sentinels had all but disbanded. Her only other interactions were sewing up soldiers in their last moments as they recited their regrets. Some days it was too much for her. An all too familiar feeling of stitching up arena fighters in Old Cairo who would end up dead the next day regardless of her work. Shaylee wanted to see people enjoying life, not fighting for the right to live it the way they wanted to. It was just more of the same. Still, it hadn't been all bad. She had been training new medics, wiping noses and treating common illnesses that had been ravaging some of the civilians. It was a new kind of stress given New Purgatory's lack of sterile medical equipment, but it beat pulling out bullets and clamping bleeds, which she spent the other half of her time doing. Janet laughed when Shaylee explained her downtime. Janet wanted her to have fun, drink, and get laid. Have a chance to relax instead of taking on more hassles that could have been left to other people. Janet would remind the medic of how beautiful she was and that she shouldn't waste her time watching when she could be engaging. Shaylee's mind just wasn't in that mode. The medic found it difficult to shake the memory of watching Layla Lansfield bleed out, murdered by Mikhail Koslov. Then the thoughts came of Alex and how horrible she felt for him. Worse still, she nearly looked like Layla, save a few facial features and their hair color. Before Alex had left, she could see the pain in his eyes every time she tried to speak to him. Now he was gone. Gone to the only place he could go, maybe to find a measure of peace. The old team knew where he was, but Shaylee found herself struggling to make the trip. There was a void left by Alex moving on. He built the Sentinels for protection of the city, but now they were either dead or had moved on to different paths. She sighed out loud and swished her oliveless toothpick around in her drink. For the moment, there was a relative amount of peace. Thomas Beruger had been all bluster in the council meetings, but that was the extent of his attacks. The sanctions the council had slapped on him limited his ability to stage any attacks on other nations without dealing with their retribution. While all that had gone on, Shaylee heard Japan was well on its way to rebuilding in their home country. Russia was starting construction on their own reactor, and Egypt had hell choppers coming in constantly with trade goods and soldiers. Every now and again there was a raider attack, or a fight between refugees and old Morrison citizens or soldiers, but it was never unmanageable. Janet made sure of that. Shaylee saw her as a woman who couldn't help but lead from the front. She saw that she would have rather been a plain soldier, but circumstance dictated where the general needed to be. Or maybe where she knew she had to be. As if on cue, Janet appeared, moving past people on the dance floor. She moved with purpose, no grin on her face, no cigarette hanging from her lip or behind her ear. She had cut her hair that once fell to her back to down around her shoulders. She noticed that Janet was making straight for her. That made Shaylee nervous. Shaylee lifted her drink and sipped it as Janet took a seat opposite of her, then dimmed the lights on the booth. Shaylee just waited while Janet punched up the orders for her own drink. After that, Janet reached into her pocket and pulled out several grainy pictures. "What's this?" Shaylee asked as she picked one up. "The first one was taken by the Russians from one of their satellites this morning.
What does that blob of silver look like to you? Janet asked. Shaylee could hear Janet tapping her fingers on the table while she brought the print closer to her face. Shaylee couldn't make it out. It was too grainy and almost smeared. Shaylee was more impressed that Russia still had active satellites with imaging equipment well after the Great War. I give up, Shaylee finally said, laying the paper down on the table. Janet leaned over the table and lowered her voice. This was taken over London. That's the Silver Angel. Now we know for sure. Shaylee shrugged her shoulders. We already knew that. So now you have proof and want me to go. Janet scowled. That's right. But you were right to suggest that we check, because there's this. Janet slid the other piece of paper across the table. The second image was zoomed in and clearer. There was a man in a black skin suit standing outside of a hell chopper. Shaylee knew the man immediately. Koslov. Beruger's starting his shit again, Janet replied. He knows that Alex is in London too. But since it's a dead zone, the council won't see it as an aggressive act unless he goes for the refugees. But he's covering his bases. He's going after Alex with Koslov. But why? Shaylee asked. Beruger's already lost. There's no reason for it. If I had to guess, Beruger's on the hunt. He's playing a slow game, but he's got to move his chess pieces first. He wants Alex dead. First is to appeal to his sense of vengeance, which makes people do stupid shit. If he gets him, I'm next. Then Tyrese. He'll try to take us from the top down. After that, I don't know. It won't matter. Vengeance would make two of them. You know Alex wants the same thing, Janet. It's a race to see who kills who first. Shaylee stared at Janet, who was looking down at her beer. So what do you want me to do? What we planned. I need you to go and find him. But don't bring him back here. You need to take him to Jerusalem. At least there he'll be safe. Beruger won't try anything there. And if he went missing, the council would start asking questions. The medics I've trained here should be fine without me. They know enough to keep the wounded mended. And we've had a few medics from Russia come in to help me train. They're here for at least a month, Shaylee said. Janet leaned back in her chair and sipped her beer. Shaylee caught a flash in her eye, like the words clicked a missing piece into place. Shaylee sipped her own drink. I don't want to do this. It feels wrong, Shaylee said. I need Keeley here, and I can't go. You know I would if I could, Janet replied. You realize what you're asking? Alex might have an eye for talent, but that's it. He never liked me from the start, and Layla even less. You know he hates that I look like... Stop, Janet cut her off. Okay, stop, I get it. But it's also what I'm banking on, as much as that hurts me to say. Before he left, Alex was as bad as I've ever seen him, talking to himself, keeping himself separated from me and everyone else. Alex told me he could see Layla when he walked the streets or sat in this bar. I tried to do everything I could. The same he did for me when Elias died. Can you believe that? Elias was his best friend, and he was comforting me. Shaylee shook her head. The meaning wasn't lost on her, but she opted for a very Janet reply. What are you suggesting I do? You want me to pity fuck him to pull him out of whatever he's in? For fuck's sake, Shaylee, Janet yelled, drawing the attention of the nearby crowd. She looked back and then lowered her head and her voice. No, that's not what I want, and that's not what he needs either. He needs somebody to talk to, someone to get in close. I figured a doctor might be the best one to handle that. I'm not that kind of doctor. Hell, I'm not even an actual doctor, Shaylee shot back. You know what I mean, Shaylee. So will you do it? Or at least try to? The medic didn't want this. She liked Alex. From the moment she had met him, there was an attraction there, stifled by the fact that even if the man had been interested, it didn't matter. But no more than a week ago, he'd whizzed a bullet by her ear. That wasn't the man she followed. In her mind, she thought it might be better if he ended up dead in whatever dead zone he found himself in. That man out there is not Alexander Velasco, Janet. He's someone else. There's a part of me that does want to help him, but he's still Alexander Velasco, Janet replied. He wouldn't have done what he did out in the waste if he wasn't. But he's broken, hurting, and alone. If we don't try to help him, then what does that make us? Shaylee winced, then nodded her head a few times. Okay, I see your point. Do you have a plan? Yeah, I do. With 3 rifles pointed down at him, All Alex could do was slowly swing his across his back and extend his hands out. "Who are you?" one of the gunmen called out. "A drifter. I was looking for shelter from the rain," Alex yelled back. One of the riflemen looked towards another, then back at Alex. "American?" "Yeah. Not a Marine." "Far from it. Can I reach for my bag?" "Go ahead, but if you pull any shit..." "I won't." Alex set the bag down in front of him, so the three men on the ramparts could see him. He unzipped a large pouch of a bag and gently pulled out a large glass bottle by its handle. "I assume you all drink?" Alex called out. "How about a trade?" The men looked at each other, then gave him a nod. He kept the handle in his hands and moved towards the gates. It wheeled and creaked open slowly. A dark-skinned man waited for him at the entrance. For less than a moment, Alex thought of Dellen. But he was dead, and the man's python-sized arms and broad shoulders ruled that out. "You're seeing shit again. Remember how much that freaked Janet out? At first she thought you were speaking metaphorically. Then she realized the truth. You're a goddamn nut job." Alex held the bottle out towards the man, but one of the other troops swooped in and grabbed it out of Alex's hand. "So what do you want for that?" the large man asked. "A chance to get my clothes dry, maybe a small meal. Is that fair?" Alex asked. The large man smiled. "Hell, you want a rover or a looter? You're welcome to stay if you want. I'm Orion." "You're American too," Alex said, noting the man's accent. "That's right. Came out here from New Purgatory after trade started picking up. I like the weather, and I figured this might be the only chance to get cultured." Alex's face twisted a bit. Now he was worried if these men were ex-Morrison. "I'm Alex. And those two your boys?" "Yeah, Darius and Royce. They came out here with me from the States. Couldn't have a better job. Come on, let's get you near the fire and I'll tell you all about it." Alex felt confused, but decided that he would enjoy the smoked fish that Orion had provided him. The rations were too good for what felt like an out-of-the-way base. What bothered Alex more was that Orion was American. "I hate to ask, Orion, because it makes me feel out of the loop, but you said you flew here?" "Oh yeah. Contracted by New Purgatory. We're part of the S4 regiment. Best of the best in General Trischella's army." "But you're just a way station?" Alex asked. "Nah, we're one of 3 other posts, guarding an enclave of English. I guess the boss has a thing for protecting the refugees out here. She thinks that if they can do what we did back home, it'll send a message to the rest of the world. Hard to argue when you look at the progress." Alex tried to keep mum. He didn't have to explain himself. "Well, how about that?" "You know, you look sort of familiar. You sure we haven't met before? Little out of place for a random American to be out in these wastes," Orion noted. "Good luck talking yourself out of this one, dumbass. It was coming eventually. I'd have remembered if we had." It wasn't a lie, not really. Alex just didn't want the hero treatment when he was trying to escape that life. He had hoped his longer hair and growing beard would disguise him. Of course, it did him no favors outside of New Purgatory. Why would it here? "Smoke?" Orion asked as he reached into his chest pocket. "Sure," Alex replied. Orion tossed him a cigarette, which Alex put in his mouth. Without thinking, he reached for his flick lighter and lit the cig's end. "Shit, I knew it," Orion said. Alex raised his eyebrows as he took a long drag. "Knew what?" "You're him. You're Alexander Velasco." Alex shook his head. "What gave you that idea?" "Oh, come on, man. One guy traveling alone in these wastes happens to be American and you went missing 6 months ago? Shit fits. Doesn't help half the recruitment posters are of you hunched over and smoking." "They put me on posters?" Alex asked. "I'll have to ring Vale out for that next time I see him." Orion just laughed and took a drag off his cigarette. Alex shook his head and sighed while exhaling smoke. All he could do now was hope Orion wouldn't get on a radio and tell Janet. "So Janet has you out here protecting all of Dellen's old people? Is her army really that large now?" Alex asked. "Getting there. We're also a resupply station for Egyptian, Russian, and Japanese birds. Maybe not for long, though. There's been some rumor about evacuating. Can't say why." That drew Alex's interest. "This is the refugees' home. Not all of them are going to up and leave," he said.
You'd be surprised how persuasive the Rovers can be in that regard. That problem is getting worse. Between the noise of hell choppers coming in every day and all the new construction, we've had more attacks than ever. There's no sign of them going away. Whenever we take out a large group, more just show up in their place. Alex shook his head. It was shit like this that made him wish he had stayed in New Purgatory. The Rovers could be dealt with, yet now a retreat was being sounded. It made him wonder what the hell had gotten into Janet. Those thoughts were interrupted when one of Orion's boys shouted to him from the top of the rampart. "Hey, Pop, you might want to come see this." Orion got up and Alex followed. The two unslung their rifles, looking out at a mass of bodies lumbering slowly toward their outpost. Rain was falling hard, drenching Alex's nearly dry clothing. When he and Orion reached the top of the ramparts, Alex lowered his rifle. "What the hell?" "I've never seen this many in one place," Orion said. For Alex, it was like Morrison's tower all over again. The mass of bodies coming towards him kicked the memory over. It had been a long time since he had seen that many enemies bearing down on him. "Dad, what the hell do we do?" That was one of Orion's sons. Orion looked over at Alex. "They have weapons, too. We don't have enough ammo to take them all out. Tell me you have an idea, Crusader." Alex could bet the other two outposts were about to have the same problem, but no one would be able to man a radio. A threat this big, it was all hands on deck. "Do you have any explosives?" Alex asked. "We've got a box of stingers and 2 old mortars." "Get them, and then grab whatever ammo you have. I have an idea." Alex took 2 grenades for himself and one of the mortars. The Rovers were already laying inaccurate fire while continuing their advance towards the outpost. Alex wasn't sure if they could climb walls, but it wouldn't matter if they started running atop their own bodies. Orion had looked at him as if he was crazy. Maybe he was, but someone had to divert the Rovers. Alex jumped from the ramparts into a relatively clear area. He hefted up his rifle and fired a few shots, clearing a path towards a tall building just opposite the outpost. Most of the Rovers in the horde ignored him and focused on the rifle fire coming from the outpost. Alex hesitated to look back and saw that the Rovers were closing in on Orion and his people. When he turned back, a Rover was in his face and had grabbed him by the shoulders, tossing him to the ground, and was screaming in his face. Its head dove down towards Alex's body to bite him. Alex forced his rifle into the Rover's chest with one arm and reached for his parang blade with the other, and then slashed hard across the Rover's stomach. He felt hot blood pour onto his fatigues, a warm contrast compared to the icy rain on his face. When he felt the Rover's body go limp, he pushed it aside and forced himself back on his feet. Several more Rovers were moving towards him now. Alex ran for the tall building's interior. It was pitch black inside, even with all the windows blown out. He cursed that his rifle didn't have a flashlight in that moment, more so because he could hear the groans of Rovers moving near him. Alex ignored them and set up the mortar. He didn't have long to complete his plan. He fired one round from the muzzle flash that woke the Rovers up. Alex ran for the large foundation pillars inside the building and reached into his pack. Stickers, his favorite tool in the guerrilla war he had waged against John Morrison. They were flat patches that went onto surfaces like a band-aid and then could explode remotely or on touch. He put one on this pillar and ran for another. The groans were getting worse now. Alex didn't look to see how well the next sticker was placed and did the same 2 more times. Then he ran back for the mortar and lit the fuse. In the dead light, he could see the walking, drug-addled, and radiation-poisoned bodies moving ever closer to him. He stood and used his rifle as a battering ram, pushing the Rovers out of his way as he made his way back to the street. The explosion knocked him hard into the murky rainwater, but his plan had succeeded. The noise of a mortar crashing and echoing into a building drew the Rovers away from the outpost. All at once, the Rovers began rushing toward that building, packing in like raving animals looking for a piece of bloodied meat. Alex smiled to himself as he went to his pocket and clicked the detonator, causing the stickers inside to explode. The explosion made the building rattle, and a moment later it began to collapse on itself, taking the Rovers with it. Alex covered his eyes as dust and rubble came flying towards him. When it finally cleared, he could see the remainder of the Rovers running back into the heart of London. No others rushing for the outposts. Alex assumed they were either dead or had fled. He forced his body upwards and hefted his rifle. There were stragglers.
Some caught under building material, which he mercifully ended with a shot to the head, and others blinded by the dust that he slashed at with his blade as he passed them. From afar, he could see Orion and his boys atop the ramparts, drinking from water bottles. "Fucking hell, Alex, you're insane," he heard over the comm. Alex shook his head and jogged back to the outpost and inside. Orion's son Darius tossed him a bottle of water. Alex took a long sip and pulled off his hood to let the rain wash the grime off of his forehead. What surprised his new friends had already been an afterthought in his mind. Orion jumped down from the ramparts and gave Alex a slap on the shoulder. "Where the hell did you get that idea?" "They hate noise," Alex answered. "I knew the mortar would lure them, and I got lucky having those stickers in my bag. Sorry you're out of mortar, though." "Shit, you saved me a box of stingers. I'll call it even," Orion replied. Alex nodded at him and took another pull from the water bottle. He wondered what the hell forced such a large incursion of rovers. "They bite you at all?" Darius asked. "They tried. That's not my blood, though," Alex said, pointing to a few splotches on his coat. "Why, you worried about infection?" Orion shook his head. "No, my boys read one too many old war books. They think the rovers are like zombies, which ain't the case. I should know." He pulled up one of his sleeves, revealing 3 scars in the shape of bite marks. "If they're zombies, I'd have been one months ago." "Well, then what the hell are they, then?" Darius asked. "Couldn't tell you," Alex replied. "Even the old doctor couldn't figure it out. We assume radiation poisoning or drugs. Sort of like raiders, but worse. Wrong." "That's not comforting," Darius replied. Alex pulled the glove off his left hand and held it up. His middle finger was nothing more than empty space. "Cannibals outside of Vegas. I wouldn't worry about zombies, kid. The world has enough monsters already." After all the excitement, Alex decided to sit alone at the large fire in the center of the outpost. The rain had died down, allowing the blaze to burn brightly into the night. He still had so many questions about how Janet and the other nations had set up way stations so far away. He was curious about who was now leading Dellen's refugees. He could bother Orion with that later. The man was sleeping, and his other son Royce was alone on the wall, and an ear out for any yelling about rovers. The fire was nice. It burned slow and dried gray building material to Alex's clothes, but Alex didn't care. He was warm, full, and for the first time in 6 months felt like he was at a strange sort of peace. Whether it was because he brought Layla home, or the euphoria from combat, he didn't know. His mind was still attempting to take over, talk to him, and of course he talked back, but it wasn't happening right now. It was calm. It was like being home. Alex didn't have a real definition of home, but he felt like this place could fit it well. He pulled off his coat and set it on the ground and reached into his bag for his journal, somehow unharmed by the constant rain that had hit his back. He stared at the leather coating for a few minutes. Part of him wanted to toss it into the fire. Another part thought he should have left it in Layla's home. She wrote passages in there. Did you really lay her to rest if you could just read what she wrote repeatedly? She's still in your head, still haunting you. You just can't let go, can you? Whenever Alex read his earlier passages, it filled him with the same rage he had once directed at John Morrison, either at his own foolishness or at the signs he had ignored that Layla so plainly put to paper. He felt like he had squandered his time with her, that he had been too focused on his goals and not on her. When he read her entries, that confirmed his thoughts. She'd given up the life she wanted for Alex's cause, and in turn, gave up her life in full. He sighed out loud. He could hear the rain starting up again, hitting a tarp above the tents where Orion and his boys would sleep. Alex decided to lift his journal and write. He picked a fresh page, pulled the cap off the pen, and put it to paper. I left New Purgatory again. I left Janet and everyone else behind. There was an argument, so I took the GTO and left, but then they found me. So I had to escape. Again. Janet told me she needed me there. Those words were repeated by Shaylee and Keeley. I wasn't ready to hear those words. Everywhere I looked, I saw Layla. Saw her in everything and everyone. Crowds, the bar, people just trying to survive. There she was. There she is. So what did I do? I went to her home. My hope was that I would father some peace of mind. It's only been a few hours, but I'm happy that I was able to bring her memory home one last time. I just wish it hadn't been this way. I wish I could have come back here with her again. Even with the rovers and the problems, we could have made it work. We could have escaped the recent problems that face our lives. It all brings me back to Mikhail. My old team must think I'm hunting him down. The truth is that I'm running, biding my time. I don't have contacts anymore. I don't have any backup. But I do have a plan. I'm going to take Thomas Beruger down, just like Jack Newsom planned to take down John Morrison. I know it will steal the soul from my body and the love from my heart. I don't care. Beruger and Koslov have already taken everything else. If I sacrifice a bit more, I can take everything from them. They must die. They need to die. I won't be able to walk this earth in peace with the two of them still breathing. That's what seems to be happening right now. Why Beruger is allowing the trade between nations escapes me, though he might fear Jerusalem and the Council's wrath. That Council should be the least of his worries, because I don't give a shit what they do. Beruger should be worried about my hands around his throat and my knife in his chest. Alex could feel pain in his fingers and set the journal aside. He was so angry he was taking it out on the paper and pen. He needed to stop. He got up and left his coat on top of the journal and went for the bottle of booze Orion had left out in the open. He grabbed one of the glasses nearby and used rainwater to clean it off. Then he grabbed another and did the same. Alex filled the 2 glasses nearly full and went to the ramparts where Royce was. "Drink?" Alex asked. "What is it, anyway?" the kid asked. Alex shrugged his shoulders and took a sip from the glass. "Best guess, a mix of whiskey and rum. It tastes like shit." Royce nodded and took the glass from Alex's hand. He slugged back half of it, stopped to take a breath, and then slugged down the rest. Alex shook his head as he took his down at a pull at a time. "How often are you guys resupplied?" Alex asked. "Depends on who comes in. Sometimes it's twice a month, other times it's 4. Mostly medical supplies, rations and ammo. Then there's troop rotations from Egypt to New Purgatory." "Like a well-oiled machine," Alex replied. "All thanks to you, I'd imagine, and your team," Royce replied. Alex was surprised to hear that. He never reveled in his victories, or the work he put in for his city. He had to admit that it was nice that what he set in motion was liked by the people, even embraced. Not taking the time to stop and see the results had blinded him to what his team's accomplishments meant. He let a smile loose until he heard an all too familiar sound, the hum of an engine. "Are you expecting a resupply soon?" Alex asked. "Just got one last week, so I doubt it. Why?" Alex unslung his rifle and lifted it in the air. Royce didn't see it at first, but off in the distance, cutting through the fog, was a hell chopper, with all its lights on. "Shit. She was gonna find me eventually. Damn." "Well, what the hell?" Royce said aloud. "Hell has nothing to do with it. This is on me," Alex said. "There," Shaylee said above the roar of the hell chopper's engine. "Set me down there." Her pilot did as he was asked and brought the bird down just outside the circular outpost made from old refuse. Shaylee thought it was a creative way to build a base and admired it. It was almost charming compared to the broken surroundings. "We're here. Would you like me to help you unload the medical supplies?" the pilot asked. "No, you need to get some rest. I appreciate you getting me out here on your off days," Shaylee replied. "Thanks, Miss Ferris. I'll take you up on that." The pilot smiled at her as he went by. Shaylee looked out the cockpit window to hide her reddening face from the pilot. That was when she saw Alex staring up at her from outside. "Shit." He was holding up his hand that was lacking a finger and waved. There was no smile on his face. Shaylee returned his wave and made for the rear exit ramp. Alex was there to greet her, his arms crossed, his expression deadened. "What are you doing out here, Shaylee?" he asked. "Yes, Alex, I accept your apology for nearly shattering my shin bone and almost shooting me," Shaylee replied. Alex let his hands drop by his side. Shaylee wondered if he had forgotten or just didn't care. "I'm sorry," he said. "You'd better be," Shaylee replied. "I'm here delivering medical supplies." Right, Alex shot back. How'd Janet find me? Shaylee reached into her hooded jacket and pulled out 2 of the satellite images and then handed one of them to Alex. Because she's not stupid, and because it was the obvious choice. That and the image for proof. Here, I forgot she was the smart one. I left her in charge for a reason. So are you here to bring me back now? Alex asked. Shaylee handed Alex the other, clearer image of Mikhail. She could almost hear his breathing stop and then start up again at a more rapid pace. Alex studied the image for a few moments longer before he looked up at Shaylee. Where was this taken? Here, Shaylee said. Who took it? Androv and the Russians? They took that same image of you. Alex shook his head. The image of me is too grainy. No, it had to be someone else. An insider with Berlin, maybe, or... He trailed. Or... Shaylee pressed. It's not important, Alex replied. Is this why you're here? To tell me that Koslov is on the move again, and after me? Yes, but he's not just after you. He's after all of us. He's going to kill us one by one until the Crusaders and the Sentinels are dead. And he won't stop. Alex reached for a cigarette and then offered Shaylee one. She declined. Alex covered his with one hand from the rain and lit it up. He took a couple of short drags before holding it off to the side. So I wait for him to come to me. I'm Baruger's main target, right? I kill Mikhail, then old Thomas will come up with a new plan. Shaylee shook her head. You're sure about that? You know he's been monitoring you, evaluating your mental state. Alex cocked his head sideways. You really want to go there, huh? Yeah, I do. He knows how badly you're hurt. He planned it. Killing Layla pulled you away from us. What do you think he's going to do next? Alex replied by taking another drag off his cigarette. Maybe Mikhail will just avoid you, Alex. Let you stay in hiding. Maybe he'll kill Janet, then Keeley, then Tyrese, and then me. He's going to pull apart everything we built, and then finally, when you've lost everything, including whatever is left in your mind, he'll have Mikhail kill you, Shaylee explained. Alex chuckled and slightly shook his head. Good show, Shaylee, but I've already lost everyone and everything I care about. Mikhail and Baruger have nothing else to take. Shaylee's eyes went wide, and before she even knew what she was doing, she cocked a hand back and slapped Alex across the face. You're a real son of a bitch. You lured people in with false promises of hope and then dropped them when your own illusion was shattered. You started to believe that you really were the hero some people make you out to be. Then Layla died and you gave it all up. It makes me sick to think I ever trusted or believed you. Enjoy the fucking wastes. I hope they bring you comfort when you die out here alone, knowing you could have done something to stop all this, but quit. Shaylee spun around on a heel and made back for the hold. She started reaching for crates and supplies and moving them to the ground. Alex flicked his cig in the wind. He decided that now he would try to get some sleep. Koslov was watching from a building around a kilometer away. He was impressed by Alexander's ability to stop the rovers from destroying the English outpost, though at this point he knew he shouldn't be surprised by anything Alexander did. The man was crafty and had kept himself alive even with the odds stacked against him. Mikhail still thought his plan had been a good one, though. He remembered that the rovers were sensitive to sound, and he had herded them into a mass. The same process would be hard to accomplish again with Shaylee Ferris now here, though the shadow noted their argumentative conversation. He had seen the images Shaylee had shared. Mikhail knew they would be watching for him, but not this early. The rover attack should have been the end of it, but Alexander was not the average target, and now Mikhail had put him on guard against further attacks. Mikhail peeled his vision back to his immediate surroundings. With the rovers out of play, he would have to move in on his own. Mikhail felt down at his hip for his blade. He felt nothing there except for memories and emptiness. He had left it behind when he killed Layla. Those emotions flooded back, and with those emotions came weakness he had not known for some time. Mikhail found the irony in fighting so long to restore his memories, his old life, only to hate it because those same wants brought him weakness. Even the simple items of the day, whether he had eaten that morning or cleaned blood off his suit, had been an automated process that now he would occasionally forget. He had become like everyone else, struggling to remember the events of the day in favor of tomorrow. He jutted his hand in and around the empty sheath where the blade had once been. Alexander had it. He had to have had it. In their time together, the Shadow had noted that Velasco was keen to taking trophies from those he killed. Chez Vito's parang was one example. And even from this distance, Mikhail could see the curved blade slung around the Sentinel's back. It seemed likely Alex would carry the Shadow's blade as a reminder. Deserting, as am I. Was it worth it? The memories of pain and all the years lost, that I killed my own wife, the endless torture of Severnaya replaying in my head every night I tried to sleep. He remembered that he once had a conversation with Layla in Alonsfo's bar. She asked him if getting his memories back would help him, or if he would just be lost in another new life, with the years he spent as the Shadow being nothing more than a blank area, lost to him. Sometimes the other side is not at all what we expect it to be. I had hoped to forget being the Shadow, not live within the two lives knowing what the other had done. Interesting that I traded the life of one that asked me if I could cope. The Shadow hated knowing that he had killed friends for memories that only pained him. The soldier hated the Shadow for the atrocities he had committed to return those memories. He hated himself, but he was forced to continue as a slave, for only Baruger could take away the life he had fought so hard to regain. Layla had said the same things Mikhail was telling himself. It made him wonder if she was talking more about herself than he. Layla may not have known it, but Mikhail saw she thirsted for war just as Alex did. Perhaps she was more subtle, smarter about her plans, but even she knew there would be no rest for her and Alex, not when there was a world to rebuild. That was why Mikhail was here now, but now he was a tool of war. There was no sunset waiting for him, no happy conclusion. He knew Baruger would make sure of that, so for now he served. He would serve until he could find a way out, and then he would escape. To what or where did not matter. Mikhail removed his hand from the empty sheath, and instead checked to make sure his pistol was still attached to its holster. Then he began setting up a rope to attach to his hell chopper for rappelling down the building. He grasped the cable tightly and slid down the side of gray ash-coated place he had used as a landing pad. Dead zones were the hardest places for his emotions to deal with. For every window he passed, he saw desks and tables turned on their sides, shadowed stains of what was once a person, or piles of bones next to pens or ashen booklets that had been their work. He had caused all of this. His mind debated whether the world would have escalated itself to total nuclear war, but that did little to ease his guilt. How many people have I killed that still walk this earth? Alexander was the first name he thought of. He had killed him before he was even born. Layla, until recently, when he plunged his knife in her. He had killed all their chances at a normal life, ended with the press of a button. They should have hated him. Alex should have killed him the moment he told him the truth. The soldier would have lit him. Now he was chained to a man that wanted to create his own order through chaos. Mikhail made it to the ground level, and unhooked himself from the rope. He gave it a tug, and it stayed solid. There was little chance a rover would climb it, so he left it as it was, and then he walked the road. He made way for his old friend, pondering how he would bring himself to murder him. New Purgatory. That's where Alex found himself. Rain was blowing through a broken window, and Layla was standing at his side. It was not unlike the day he killed John Morrison. He tried to look around, but was focused on the outside. The rain. Rain that could not exist because it fell from a cloudless sky, painted blood red. He watched as other buildings collapsed around him. New Purgatory was burning. His heart began beating faster. He turned around to look at Layla, but she was gone. A bloodstain replaced where she had stood. He tried pulling for his rifle, but it too was gone. He heard a voice calling. Alex looked down at John Morrison's corpse. His eyes were glowing orange, and his mutilated body moved. "You killed me," he shouted. Alex tried to look away, but wherever he looked, his focus was still on that floor. "You killed me!" Morrison had morphed into Elias. Alex tried to run for the door. It slammed open in front of him. There, Layla stood, her skin desiccated and pale, her blue eyes gone, her hair matted and missing. She stood in front of him, holding the wound in her ribs where endless blood impossibly seeped through her hands. He didn't want to look at her. He couldn't. "You killed me, Alex." Her tone was somber, not angry like the others. Bloodied tears ran down her corpse-like cheeks. "Why did you kill me?" He felt his own tears running down his face. Alex couldn't stop looking at her as he took several steps backwards. He stopped when he bumped into something. No, someone. As he turned, he saw Jack Newsom. The man was in his military fatigues, his beard trimmed and blue eyes normal. He was not an animated corpse as the others had been. The old man held a glass of brown liquor in one hand. Even in death, the old man was an alcoholic. Alex tried to open his mouth to speak, but he couldn't. Jack sipped from his glass and then brought it down to his side. Alex saw the tight grip the old man had. The glass shattered in his hands, and Jack rubbed his fingers into his palm, pushing the glass deeper in. "You killed me, Alex. You killed us," Jack said, stepping forward and placing his bloodied hand on Alex's shoulder. "Was it worth it?" Alex twitched hard and his eyes opened. He sat up and tried to remember where he was. He was on a cot, and the blankets and sheet around him were drenched in his sweat. "What the hell?" He looked around the makeshift shelter. "Where the hell am I?" It took a few moments for Alex to remember. He saw other men and women sleeping in cots. Some were awake, reading or playing cards in silence. There were rifles on a gun rack near the door and ammo boxes under them. London. I'm in London for Layla. He knew that was all the sleep he was going to get. After a nightmare like that, he wanted to get up and move. Alex threw his legs over the side of the cot and began to lace up his boots. He looked up when he heard footsteps from the entrance. It was Orion and Shaylee. He said nothing, but motioned for Alex to follow him. Alex replied with a nod and reached under the pillow for his shirt, then tossed it over his shoulder. Rain and cold would wake him up. The trio stepped outside. Alex noted the somber look on Orion's face, but Shaylee did not share it. In fact, Alex thought she seemed frightened. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Alex asked. Orion pointed towards the center of the camp. Near the large bonfire, there were 2 bodies covered in a tarp. Alex's eyes went wide. "No," he said. "Where were they?" "The ramparts. Those are my boys, Alex." Orion moved back into the shelter, with his head in his hands. "My boys." His voice trailed. "Bullet wounds, Alex. No one heard anything, but there's more. Follow me," Shaylee said as she led Alex over to the ladder. When they reached the top, there was a lone figure standing outside the outpost. Alex knew who it was. He reached for his gun, but Shaylee placed a hand over it. "Tried that. Nothing happened," she continued. Alex let his hand off the pistol. "Stay here," he said, and then jumped down from the ramparts. Alex moved across the dusted gray surroundings. The bodies and red pools of blood were the only signs of vibrant color on this battlefield. He wasn't sure what made him feel sicker, the sight of blood, the smell of smoking flesh, or that Mikhail Koslov was standing in front of him with no signs of shame or remorse on his face. "Alexander?" the shadow said, as Alex stopped about 2 meters away from him. Alex stared at Mikhail, his hand placed on his gun. He said nothing and waited, where Mikhail was blank-faced. Alex wore a look of disgust. "I know you didn't want to see me again." "He kills my love and gets rewarded by getting to use contractions again." "My intention is to deliver a warning, not to kill you," Mikhail continued. "That why you stirred up the rovers, or killed those men at the outpost?" Alex asked. "They attacked me first. I responded as you would, Alexander." "Bullshit. But we're talking right now. You don't know me as well as you think." "That is because you are smart. Besides, you don't really want to die here in London, do you? In the place you buried the memory of your lover?" Alex never knew Mikhail to be threatening. The man would simply act. It was true then. He had betrayed the Sentinels to regain his memory. The man was not the Mikhail he knew. He gripped the pistol hard and felt sweat and rain running on his neck. "You don't get to speak of her, Mikhail. You murdered her for your own selfish needs, just like you murdered the world." Alex caught a slight twitch in Mikhail's cheek. His emotions were in full swing, but while he could be more menacing, the assassin had not yet learned to take insults. Mikhail dropped into a smile. "No, Alexander. You did." Alex ripped his pistol from its holster and fired off 2 shots that crashed into Mikhail's chest. The armor he wore absorbed the blow, but the shadow doubled back for a moment. Alex kept the pistol raised but stopped. He hated pistols, and he'd run out of ammo before hitting Mikhail's head. It was anger that fueled those shots. Alex dropped the gun and reached for the parang at his back. Then he grabbed for Mikhail's knife at his side, the same one that killed Layla. He pulled it from its sheath and threw it onto the dirt in front of him. "Foolish, Alexander. Know that I will kill you with that blade." Alex said nothing, but outstretched his arm with the long curved blade he had taken off a bounty hunter little over a year ago. He brandished it towards Mikhail. They sidestepped around, each waiting for each other to make his first move. Mikhail struck first. He rolled and grasped a handful of dirt and slung it towards Alex's face. Alex covered up, but when he dropped his hands, Mikhail was up with the knife, rushing forward. Alex brought up the parang and knocked the knife upwards, parrying the thrust. Alex spun and brought his blade outward, but the shadow jumped back, missing the whirlwind. Alex swung his blade wildly towards Mikhail. With each swath, Mikhail took another step back. Alex was breathing heavily until he finally took his own step back and the two began to circle again. Mikhail feinted a few steps to try and catch Alex off balance, but the sentinel's breathing began to steady, and he kept his blade up at guard. Alex rushed at him again, but Mikhail sidestepped the charge and threw an elbow into Alex's side, doubling the man over. The shadow went to drop his blade on the back of Alex's skull, but Alex rolled away. He came up clutching his ribs, but kept his blade up. "Was it worth it?" Alex asked through strained breaths. "Huh? Are you comforted by all the names and faces of people you wanted to serve, knowing that you killed them all?" Alex saw that Mikhail's face was strained, angry, or conflicted. "He knows. He fucking knows, and he still did it." "You were a friend, Alexander. You, of all people, should know why I've made this choice." "No, Mikhail, I'll never understand it. You were trying to make amends, to fix the damage you had done. Instead, you created more." "I did what was necessary," Mikhail yelled. "Even you can understand that. Freedom of the mind is worth more than 1,000,000 lives, and I've killed billions. If I had to do it again, I would, but I would kill her again just to watch the life drain out of her." "Layla." Alex dropped his parang and rushed Mikhail. The shadow went for a thrust, but Alex dropped down and tackled Mikhail. The blade fell by their side. Alex was on top of Mikhail, raining down fists to the shadow's face. Mikhail attempted to fight back, aiming for Alex's ribs, but he felt his arms becoming weaker as Alex hammered his own fists down. Mikhail tried to reach up to grab Alex's throat, but Alex reared back and returned with a vicious elbow that caught the shadow on the temple. Mikhail's arms dropped by his sides, and he stared up at Alex. The sentinel reached to the side and grabbed Mikhail's survival knife, putting it to the shadow's throat. "Someone should have done this to you a long time ago. Brandon was right, but I trusted you over him. Now you get what's coming to you. This is for Layla." Alex pressed the blade deep into Mikhail's throat, and he lightly sawed back and forth. Not hard enough to open the massive cut he wanted to, but enough for little droplets of blood to begin coming to the surface. And then he stopped and pulled the blade back. He held it as if he was going to stab down. Mikhail's soulless eyes just looked up at him. Alex wanted to drive Mikhail's own blade through his throat, but this wasn't how he wanted to kill Mikhail. He looked at the blade, then at Mikhail again. "An execution. No, I'm not him. I won't do what he did to so many people. What he did to Layla." Alex threw the blade out into the dirt and stood up, taking a few steps back and away from Mikhail. "Get up," Alex said. Mikhail did as he was told. He stood, then turned to face Alex. "For everything you did, you still saved my life and Layla's once. For that, you get to walk away. Leave and do not come back, or I will kill you next time. Do you understand? I'm letting you live." Mikhail shook his head. Blood was running down from his throat and face. "Why?" Alex pointed a finger to his head. "Because I'm not the Reaper the others made me out to be. I'm not what Layla thought I was turning into. I am better than that, and I'm better than you. In combat and in the mind. If you come after me again, you'll be right where you were. Baruger won't stop until all the others are dead, Alexander. You must know this," Mikhail said. "Yeah, that I do. What do you think he'll do to you when the rest of us are dead? You didn't think about that, did you?" Alex paused. "I wonder about you, Mikhail. You see a man that smart, that involved in the world of politics. Do you ever stop to think that maybe he's manipulated a person or two in his lifetime? I see the way you fight, the way you act. The Shadow was a much better soldier than whatever you are now, and the Shadow couldn't feel like you do now. I'm willing to bet you want him to fix it. So now you need him as much as he needs you. That makes me wonder if he does make you the Shadow again, especially when he sees you return, broken, beaten in single combat by one man, his prototype failure. So now what's to stop him from taking your free will?" "I don't care about free will anymore, Alex. My mind will be free from the sins I committed. Against you and the world, Mikhail replied. Bullshit. Every day a little more of you was becoming human, in your own way and with the database, but you were still becoming a new man. Instead, you threw that away so you could wake up and hate yourself for the horrors you've wrought. You think killing me or fulfilling his goals will give you peace? You're foolish, Mikhail. Alex shot back. Mikhail finally stood up straight. He kept his expression even, but Alex knew that behind the shadow's eyes, and burning in his mind, was the hatred of every word spoken. Alex knew Mikhail had wanted his mind, and knew the shadow had paid for it with his soul. I should kill you here and now, Mikhail said, but I won't deny you your victory, Alexander. Either of them. Don't deny yourself the chance to think, Mikhail. Before you come at me again, you might want to remember who's holding your strings, and if it's worth it. I've lost too many friends, and I refuse to kill one of them when I know the real man is still in there somewhere, Alex replied. Mikhail stared at Alex a few moments longer and then turned away, grabbing his knife as he left, past the smoking corpses of rovers he had provoked and back towards his hell chopper. For a moment, and a short one at that, Alex felt sorry for his old friend. He wished the world was a different place, that he could forgive Mikhail and carry on as they had when they were Crusaders. The thought fled almost as soon as it came to him. Nothing was left for Alex except retribution. While he spared Mikhail, it was a message for Beruger. No matter what the scientist threw at him, he would fight it off. If Beruger wanted war, death, and pain, Alex was ready to bring all of those to the man himself. Mikhail was a blip in the distance for Alex now, with smoke, fog, and thick rain blurring his outline. Alex spit off to the side. His jacket and pants were again drenched by rain and covered in mud. He patted his front pocket for his smokes and then pulled them out. Still dry, he said as he opened the pack and put a branch between his lips. Alex set the pack back in his jacket and lit up the cigarette with the lighter in his other hand. When he turned around, he saw Shaylee standing just beyond the wall. Alex began a trudge toward the outpost. He was taking long drags on his cig, trying to poison his mind and calm his nerves. Mikhail had started a new fire inside of him, the kind he was hoping to escape. That same fire he felt inside Yankee Stadium when Morrison's men tried to burn it down with all the refugees inside of it. The same fire when his mother was murdered in front of him by Morrison's soldiers. Beruger needs to die. Nothing can get in the way of that now. Time to stop hiding, stop running. He's played his hand. Now it's time to reply. Vengeance, war, and death. You let him go, Shaylee said as Alex strode by her. She reached out and grabbed him by the arm. Alex turned around and stared at her. You let him go, she repeated. Alex saw that she was shivering. She must have been watching the entire time. I sent him a message, and Beruger by extension. Alex watched as Shaylee's eyes lit up. Does that mean you're coming back with me? She asked. Yeah, but not yet. I have business to handle here for an old friend. You want to help? Alex saw that Shaylee couldn't hide her surprise. He gave her a half smile, and she smiled back at him. That's the man I remember. The sentinel I'd follow to hell and back. Alex wrapped an arm around her neck and gave her a squeeze. He could almost feel the relief radiating off of her, despite the mud and grime that he was getting on her. I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, I'm here. The two made their way back into the camp where Orion awaited them. Alex wasn't sure if it was the rain or the man's eyes that caused water to fall from his face. Liar. You know damn well what it is. Did you kill him? Orion asked, his voice morose. He won't bring you any more trouble, Alex replied. I'm sorry about your sons. Orion lifted a hand to cover his eyes. Who was he, Alexander? Why did he kill my kids? Alex's first impulse was to tell the truth, to be blunt. It wasn't comforting, but at least the man would understand. Fighting rovers and protecting civilians was different than facing an assassin who had killed men in numbers best described as legion. Instead, Alex took a page from Jack Newsom's book. I'm not sure. Seemed like a crazy refugee, maybe ex-military. He's been dealt with, Orion. The leader of the small settlement nodded. Alex felt his stomach twist. Either way, the man would be upset, but why tell him he and his sons were targeted? Alex would rather bear the lie than be berated for bringing death upon the man's sons. So, What's next for you then? Leave him before we bury the dead? Orion asked. Not yet. The refugee group from the college gardens. Are they still in the royal quarter? Alex asked. No, they rebuilt after Dr. Johnston's evacuation. Our outpost protects most of their compound. It's designed like this, but larger and with a roof. Who leads them now? Old Dell said his surgeons and doctors would take over, but he never told me who the clear successor would be, Alex asked. Orion tilted his head sideways. Alex thought he looked unsure. If he didn't tell you, there must have been a reason. I'm not sure I should... Orion, I've been scouting this place for weeks now. I know it's Dellen's daughter. She looks just like him. I'm only asking for her name. How the hell? Orion started. Even Shaley looked confused. Alex just crossed his arms. He hadn't known himself until he hit the ground weeks ago. Of course, Jack's journal had implied Dellen had a daughter that he was hiding from his old team. It's not important. What is important is giving this to her. Alex reached into his coat, and he pulled out a pair of dog tags. These were her father's. I owe it to him that she gets them. Orion's surprise had faded. He gave Alex a nod. Thea Johnston. Give her my regards. Alex placed the tags back in his jacket and turned back towards the road. Alex, shouldn't we just fly? Shaley asked. Alex didn't reply. He just put one foot after the other, regardless of if his feet hit pavement or puddle. Shaley ran after him. Shaley had noticed that Alex was smoking more than he used to. She remembered a man that would occasionally light up a cigarette after a fight or during the initial stages of planning. Now he seemed to have another lit up before the first one went out. You're going to need an examination when we get back, you know. Better to cut that nasty habit before I've got to cut it out of you, Shaley warned. Alex flicked a half-done cigarette into the wind. Yes, ma'am, he replied. Shaley sighed quietly. It was the most he had said since they left Orion's camp. She wondered how he could be so warm yet so cold within less than an hour. They were wandering the roads back into the inner city of London. She wanted to talk with him, hear what he had gone through the last 6 months, but he closed himself off. If you don't try, you won't know. So where did you go? Shaley asked. Alex didn't stop his pace. He just looked down at his rifle. It was a nervous tick. His sights were lined up fine. Are you going to answer or keep stalling so you can lie like you did to Orion? Shaley pressed. Knowing the truth wouldn't have helped him, Alex replied. You mean he would have thought less of you for bringing in an assassin to his home? That stopped Alex. It's not about me. He turned around and glared at her. I was a couple of different places. Shaley counted that as a victory. He deflected and then deflected back to her original question. Where? Alex turned around and picked up his feet again. Why do you care? I don't. Janet does. She was worried about you and I can't blame her. You took off without anyone knowing. Before the outskirts, Keeley had written you off as dead. Remind me to start playing cards with her then, Alex said. Alex, stop. Will you just stop and look at me for a minute? Shaley pulled on his jacket and spun him around. He just stared at her. He wasn't angry, upset, or even surprised. His face was just empty, tired, worn. His brown eyes looked lifeless. The dark edges around them told her he hadn't been sleeping. Home, Alex finally said. I went home again, to California. I took a hell chopper there and then I came back. I thought I was going to stay there, but... His voice trailed off. But what, Alex? Layla. I knew I couldn't leave my work half done. She got out, just not the way we hoped. Leaving what she died for disgraces her memory, he explained. Alex had changed, subtle as it was. One moment he was warm, then like this. That made Shaley afraid of the lengths he would go to get out, to end the war he started, or what he would become by the end of it. She stared at him. She wanted to help him, to bring Alexander Velasco back, not the Reaper that was taking his place. Hold on, Alex said as he dropped a knee to the wet ground. You hear that? Shaley dropped behind him and reached for the pistol at her side. The only thing she could hear was the infinite drops of rain crashing onto the pavement. Sounds like... He turned his head toward Shaley. Someone caring. Alex let out a slight laugh and gave her a slight push. Then he got up and continued down the road. Shaley was still kneeling in the rain. She couldn't believe what she just heard. It hit her right in the heart. She bottled it up and decided to let it go. At least he was joking. That was better than the stern silence that bothered her so much. "You're an ass," Shaylee said as she moved to his side. "Mostly. Gates was right about losing social graces when on the road," Alex replied. "Gates was still personable. He didn't hate people," Shaylee replied. "I don't hate you, Shaylee. I never did. Look, just give me some time, all right? I'm still working shit out. And look," Alex stopped and turned around. "I am sorry I hit you when I ran. I shouldn't have done that. I wasn't ready to come home, but I could have just as easily walked away without all the dramatics." Shaylee looked up at him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Were you able to do what you needed to do?" Alex nodded at her. "Yes, I was." "Good," Shaylee replied. She thought it was fair. She knew she shouldn't have been pushing him so hard. Alex was dealing with the death of his lover. That wasn't something anyone could just snap out of. The two continued down the road. In a little over a year, the college garden had changed beyond Alex's belief. The trade routes that had been created did wonders. It looked more like a metal arena with old traffic signs, vehicle husks, and steel beams for walls. The familiar rumble of generators and blinding spotlights made him feel like he was back in New Purgatory. The gates to the enclosure were open to them. No one on the ramparts stopped them or called them out. "Too much faith in their outposts," Alex said aloud as he and Shaylee made for a large grouping of tents at the center of the compound. "I expected this place to be more downtrodden." "Janet's stories," Shaylee trailed. "She wasn't exaggerating. Whoever engineered the rebuild is doing a hell of a job," Alex said. Alex noted that most of the tents were empty, though evening was fast approaching. He took in the sights of the base. Guards were changing shifts to the ramparts at the south near the entrance. There were hell choppers and crates at the east, and lighted windows in the buildings that surrounded the compound. "There," Alex said, pointing towards the windows. "That's where we'll find Thea." The walk was short. Alex noted that the compound was small overall, but perfect for surviving in such an inhospitable place. They passed small greenhouses of fruit and vegetables, and a stable with hemmed-in livestock. "This isn't survival. They're probably set up better than most settlements outside of New Purgatory," Shaylee said. "They could use better security. We've been here for 15 minutes and no one has stopped to ask us who we are," Alex replied. That changed when they reached the entrance of the hospital. Alex saw a man and woman dressed in black fatigues and pea coats. Each held a rifle. The woman had a scar over her right eye, which was missing. The man had a burn mark that stretched from his chin down to his throat. Alex and Shaylee stopped in front of them. "Who are you, then?" the male guard asked. "Here to see Thea Johnston," Alex replied. "You deaf? I'll ask you who you are. Not going to ask again." Shaylee was looking up at Alex. He could feel her eyes on him. "Alexander Velasco," he said with weariness. Alex felt that his name didn't mean much, even as the male guard's eyes went wide. "Impossible," the female guard said. "Bollocks, that's really him. Hi, Velasco, you're a good shot, right?" the male guard asked. "No better than anyone else. I just know when to duck." "That how you brought down John Morrison, yeah?" the female asked. "That, determination, too much blood. I'm here to pay respects to Dellen's daughter," Alex explained. The male guard nodded. "Go on in, then. There's a meeting hall about halfway down. Chances are she's in there." Alex gave the guards a nod and brushed by. Shaylee followed. He wasn't oblivious to the fact that he might have made the grunt's day just by being who he was, but it was an odd position to be in. He had been used to going unnoticed for so long that some thought he was a hero made him feel ill. "Hero? You're not a hero, you're a murderer. They just don't know the difference. Not yet. Not until the blood is on their hands." "Shut up," he said to himself. "Alex?" Shaylee said. "Sorry, thought I heard something," he replied. Alex hoped Shaylee wouldn't mention the little meet and greet with the guards, and he got his wish as they made it to the meeting hall. Alex was surprised. He assumed Dellen's daughter would have been younger, maybe 17 or 18 years old. Instead, she looked as old as he was, 25, give or take a few years. Thea didn't notice him or Shaylee at first. Alex studied her features. She had her father's ebony skin tone, lighter, amber eyes, and her hair was shaved close to her scalp. As for the rest of her, Alex didn't care. She was bound in a heavy down jacket and snow pants, which would leave more inquisitive minds wondering. "Thea," Alex called out. The woman looked up at the doorway and raised an eyebrow, then looked back down at the book she had been reading. No rivals. She didn't have the posh English accent of her father. She sounded more like the guards out front. Not staying long. I have a delivery for you, Alex replied. Thea sighed aloud and tossed her book towards the center of the table. The loud smack seemed to punctuate her displeasure of the interruption. Go on then. What is it? Alex knew he should have been softer in his approach, but his patience was worn thin by people that refused to show common courtesy. So he reached into his coat and tossed Ellen's tags in the same manner as Thea had thrown her book. They flew in the air and clanged against the table. Alex crossed his arms and waited to see something from Thea. Shaylee was leaning in the doorway, shivering. My guards don't wear tags, but I appreciate the gesture, Thea said, reaching back for her book. I didn't get them from a fallen guard. Look at them, Alex replied. Thea stood up and leaned over the table to grab the tags, and then plopped back down in her chair. She rolled her eyes at Alex before she read the tags. That moment came and went. Now she was frozen. Alex took it in. It was a defining moment in her life now. He, of all people, knew how beautiful and awful those could be. He was a great man and leader, Thea. He saved my life and gave me invaluable knowledge. When I found out he had a daughter, well, I needed to come here and make sure you had these. Thea kept staring at the tags like she wasn't sure what to do with them. A few moments passed. Alex was growing uncomfortable, like he was intruding on her grief. Finally, Thea looked up at him. Alexander Velasco. Didn't think I'd ever be meeting you. I knew my father had died. Didn't have anything left of him, though. Appreciate it, for what that's worth. Sorry for being an ass. Alex shrugged his shoulders. Anything you need me to do while I'm here? My friend is trying to drag me to new purgatory. I'd like to prolong that for as long as possible. Never had a hero at my disposal before. I'll think of something, I'm sure. Alex cringed. How bad is the Rover situation? You killed a good amount of them, I heard. No offense, Velasco, but nothing happens in London without my knowing. Nice to see you let Orion take all the credit, even if he did lose his sons. No other threats, then? Alex diverted. Just from trade barons and bureaucrats from Jerusalem that want their share of our rebuilding. Sometimes I'd wish I'd become a doctor instead of a leader. Will you be here for a few more days? Alex looked over at Shaylee. 1 day at most, she said. There are other situations that need our attention. Thea smiled. Is this your famed ball and chain, Alex? I thought she was one of ours. Shaylee's face turned red, but Alex ignored the slight. He reached his hand inside his shirt and pulled out another set of dog tags. The ball's gone. All that's left is the chain, Alex replied with disdain. Shit. Sorry. Look, go find some coffee or food down the way. I'll catch up with you later, all right? Yeah, Alex replied as he turned towards the door. Shaylee fell in step with them. He spared a glance back and for a moment saw Layla in her face. Not again. Alex? Shaylee asked. Are you all right? I was going to ask you the same thing, he replied. I'm used to it by now. I just wish people didn't say it around you. I can't imagine how that must feel. Alex turned his head back to the hall and away from Shaylee's green eyes. We all see ghosts if we want them there, I suppose. Shaylee never had an issue being around people she did not know, and the mess hall within the London base was full of them. Alex had stopped to take in everyone, but Shaylee just moved to the end of the lunch line and grabbed the closest clean tray. Coming? She asked, glancing back to Alex, who seemed in a daze. She grabbed another tray and put it in his hands. Come on, when's the last time you ate? Alex snapped out of his trance and followed her. Shaylee saw that the food consisted of steamed vegetables and meat coated in brown sauce. The people behind the counter sloppily took ladlefuls and dropped it on both of their plates. Shaylee looked for an open table, but they were all occupied. She felt a tugging on her sleeve. Alex stepped in front of her. Come on, I know where we can sit and talk. Shaylee followed him out of the cafeteria and up a flight of stairs. Alex turned the handle into the first room he found. The wall between the outside and office was blown out, but there was an old set of office chairs and a small table. Better than being wedged in with all those people, Alex said as he took a seat. Shaylee sat across from him. Aren't you worried that Theo won't find us here? Not really. Let's eat. The two sat in silence for a while. Alex ate slowly, taking in every bite while Shaylee poked at the steamed carrots on her plate. Not bad, Alex said. What have you been eating? You must have run out of MREs. Nothing like this, Mostly game in California, deer, occasionally fish. The rest is probably better if you don't know. I put guts back inside of people and reset bones, Alex. Alex shook his head. Squirrels, rats, bird eggs, bugs. That was all after I left the coast, though. You look like you've lost weight. Too much weight. Where else did you go? Shaylee asked. Alex reached up and scratched at the beard he had grown over 6 months. You're not going to let this go, are you? For a moment, Shaylee thought she should. She wasn't a psychologist. Still, there was something about Alex that attracted her. She felt it when they met in Egypt. If there was any way to make him whole, then she wanted to try. Nope, she replied, popping a few carrots into her mouth. I'm not. Is it so hard to believe that there are people who... Shaylee trailed. No, don't go there. He won't be able to handle it. Layla's ashes are hardly cooled. Who? Alex said. Give a damn about you. Alex nodded. Shaylee wasn't sure how hard to press. Everyone had lost friends, a sibling, or even a lover. Alex had lost more than most. Tipping him over the edge was not what she wanted to do. Fuck it. Shaylee set a hand on top of Alex's, which rested on his knee. He tilted his head towards her. Those few moments of his eyes locking onto hers was all Shaylee needed. She saw all the pain in that moment. It was difficult for her to ever believe there had been a warm and cheerful man behind those deep brown eyes. Shaylee only saw longing. Didn't know you felt that way, Alex said. Shaylee kept a tight grip on his hand. She didn't want him to move it. Hard to hide it now, I guess, Shaylee replied. Alex set his plate off to the side and turned his hand around, locking fingers with Shaylee. He gripped her tight. It was comfortable, and for a moment he felt full. You're beautiful, sweet, and you care, Shaylee. But if you were with me, all of that would be destroyed. I don't want that for someone like you, who deserves so much more. Alex removed his hand and went back to eating from his plate. Shaylee felt her heart drop like icicles deep in her chest and crashing into her stomach. She set her food aside and stared out at the rain while Alex continued to take greedy bites of his meal. Thea showed up a half hour later. Alex and Shaylee sat by each other in silence, staring at the moon rising between a break in the clouds. The rain had finally let up. Thea stood and watched for a moment before getting the pair's attention. Might have a job for you two. Should you be interested? Alex turned his head halfway. Whatever you need. Appreciate the food. Wouldn't have it without Trishella. One problem she can't solve, though, not without sending some of that grand army you've amassed anyway. We can handle whatever is left of the rovers, Shaylee said. So can we, but we can't manage this. Thea held out a map with a large red X to the north. Newcastle upon Tyne, Alex said. What's up there that's so pressing? To be honest, I wouldn't normally give a shit about the Geordies. Won't have to now, they're all dead. Replaced by some folks you might be familiar with. Thea reached into her jacket and pulled out a few photos. She laid them out on the ground and took a seat behind Alex and Shaylee. High quality. Get these from Janet? Yeah, amazing what you can do with old world satellites, eh? Alex nodded and studied the images. There were hell choppers, supply containers, and tents. He looked at the next image and saw pictures of soldiers, their posture too perfect and their eyes an abnormal shade of red. Beruger's people. Is this their staging area? Don't know much about the Germans, to be honest, except that we're not allowed to attack them unless they attack us first. Dumb shit if you ask me, but that was Trishella's request. Personally, I want it dealt with before our people start going missing. Shaylee turned her head towards Alex. I can call in some friends in Egypt. Not aligned with any of the governments? No, Alex replied as he reached for the last photo. It was zoomed in on a lone man and the main lot of the harbor where Beruger's base was located. At first he thought it was McHale, but on closer inspection he recognized the gear, the outfit. So he did listen to me. Went about it in an unusual way, but this is good, Alex said under his breath. What? Shaylee asked. Nothing. I think we'll have all the help we need. Let's get the hell chopper prepped. Hollis Keller tried wiping off the small sheets of rain that had coated his jacket. He shouldn't have been smoking. If anyone was watching, they'd see it through the fog or smell it past the scent of old rotting fish. Keller didn't care. When one went out, he lit up another, all the while setting up remote mine after mine against the garages where the trucks used to collect cargo from the harbor. It wasn't long before Hollis had company. 3 men dressed in fatigues with rifles came bearing down on him. "Turn around," one shouted. Hollis stood up straight and turned, a cigarette still in his mouth. "Help you gentlemen in some way?" he asked. "Put down the charges and step away from the garage," another soldier yelled. "Afraid I can't do that." "You will do it, or we will shoot you," the 3 now replied in unison. "Ah, you're all one of those things. So do you kill me now, or do I blind each of you one by one until you stumble into my mines?" One of the soldiers raised his rifle, and the other 2 followed. Keller rolled behind a nearby trailer of the big wheelers. The soldiers fired a moment too late, and the bullets clanked against the trailer's metal hull. Keller reached down for the short blades at his waist and turned the corner. He flung his first blade hard towards the lead. The blade sunk into the skull, felling his first target. The other 2 were stunned. Their rifles were no longer trained on Keller. The bounty hunter took the opportunity to reach for his pistol and fired off 3 rounds, each into his assailants' heads. Keller watched them fall beside their leader. He holstered his pistol and reached up to his lips. His cigarette had gone out. Keller reached into his coat and snagged another that was loosely rolling around in his pocket. He put it in his mouth and lit it up, and then went back to setting up charges on the garage doors. Keller wasn't bothered by Thomas Beruger's augmented soldiers. They were nothing more than hive-minded automatons. They weren't to be feared. Keller didn't believe any being that gave up their own life to be a mind-controlled beast was worth fearing. He sucked in the smoke and let it flush through his lungs. The mix of the sea air and Virginian tobacco helped him move effortlessly between doors until the final charge was set. Keller grabbed his blade from the soldier's skull and doubled back towards a building across from the garage harbor. He had a kettle sitting on top of a fire. He moved over to it, took his gloves off, and stirred it. The cold had put a thin layer at the top of the stew he had been eating for the last 3 days. Hollis took a seat next to the fire to warm his bones and reached into his coat. He felt around it until the detonator came into his grasp. Keller pulled it out. It was large and gray with a single black dial. All he had to do was twist, and one of Thomas Beruger's supply depots would be nothing more than refuse. Keller set the detonator at his feet and went back to stirring the pot. He wasn't ready, not yet. Destroying part of the depot would be satisfying, but a bigger kill would bring him that much more enjoyment. "Are you going to tell me what you saw now?" Shaylee asked as Alex slowed the Hellchopper's descent. "I'd rather not. It'll be easier to see than to tell." Whatever the hell that means. Shaylee had been nervous to go looking for Alex, and hated that those thoughts felt vindicated. This wasn't the man she remembered following 6 months ago. There were shades of it when she could get him to talk, but now he was more reserved, more violent. "Keeping secrets isn't like you," Shaylee said as she felt the Hellchopper thump the ground. Alex didn't reply. He stood up, ran a hand through his beard, and motioned for her to follow. Shaylee watched him grab a rifle from the gun rack. She pulled her pistol from its holster and followed him down the bird's ramp. The fog and chill of Newcastle's air slapped her in the face. Shaylee pulled her shirt over her mouth and her hood over her head. Alex did neither. She couldn't help but stare at him, always so alert, looking in no direction and every direction. She knew he hadn't been militarily trained. That awareness had come from years of fighting for his own survival. Shaylee only wished she had that same experience. "Over there," Alex said. Shaylee barely heard him. "That rugged building. Windows only half boarded up. See the smoke?" he asked. She didn't, just fog, an old parking lot with cracked asphalt, and the building Alex had described. "How do you know that's smoke?" Shaylee asked. "Darker haze. You can smell it, too, past the rot." They ran down the road towards the building. Shaylee felt exposed out in the open. If Beruger did have a base out here, then they were in plain sight. A single bullet ringing out confirmed her fear. She watched Alex drop to the ground and crawl into a blown-out ditch in the road. Another bullet rang out as Shaylee jumped in after him. "What do we do?" Shaylee said. Alex postured his rifle over the crater and fired 2 rounds back. Shaylee went to do the same. "No," Alex said, placing his hand over the top of her pistol. "He's gauging us. Just follow my lead." Alex stood up and climbed out of the crater. He ejected the clip in his gun and slung the rifle around his shoulder. Shaylee had no idea what the fuck he was doing. Now he's crazy and has a death wish. Shaylee saw Alex approach the building and stop 3 meters away from the boarded-up windows. In a moment, a man appeared, crawling out like a rat from a hole. A man Shaylee thought she had never laid eyes on before, but strangely familiar. "Hollis Keller," Alex said as he placed his clip in his coat. Keller wasn't smiling. The man had his own rifle still drawn. "Velasco, come to finish me off then?" "You think I'd be standing here unarmed if I was?" Alex replied, holding his hands out. "I'm reaching for a smoke. You want one?" Hollis shook his head. "You nailed my fish kettle." "Sorry," Alex replied with a shrug as he lit up his smoke. "Must have had it coming." The bounty hunter couldn't help but let out a low, guttural laugh. "All right, enough with the bullshit, Alex. Is our offer still on the table?" Alex thought that there was something foreboding about Keller's southern drawl and deep voice. He always sounded even, whether he was angry or threatening. Alex figured it came from overconfidence, the same being a lifelong mercenary had given him. "Maybe that's why. When have you ever trusted those that kill for money? Remember Ezra? I didn't think I'd find you after you left me in New Purgatory. Thought you might take that reward and run back to Baruger," Alex said. "Physical payment was only part of the reward, and I'd never skip out on a job. Had a feeling you might be in this area next. I'm the one that sent those papers to the settlement in London. Figured if you cared at all, you'd come running. I've already rigged this place with explosives. Was just waiting for the right amount of people to show up. Bigger bang, better showmanship," Keller said as he finally dropped his guard and lowered his rifle. "It's about goddamn time you got here, Alex." "You could have saved me some time," Alex replied. "Wanted my money and didn't want to step on your toes. Knew you'd get out anyway. Now about this base. You sure you want me to blow it?" "Only reason I'm here. Like I said, I didn't think I'd find you here." "You really think you can stop him?" Keller asked. "What do you care, Hollis?" Alex asked. "You already know there's more reward waiting for you if you join with me. Winning horse and all that." "Forget I asked. Come inside. Warmer than out there." "Wait one." Alex held up a hand and motioned for Shaylee to follow. The woman pulled herself out of the hole and made for the pair. Back up, Alex?" Hollis asked. "Recovery agent. Sent to bring me home." "You're in that deep of shit, huh?" "Not yet. We blow this place sky high, and we all are," Alex answered. The group entered Keller's hovel. Alex could smell old broth and fish. Hollis wasn't lying. The soup, along with shards of a black kettle, were scattered around the floor and had nearly put out the campfire. "Glad I'm not staying long. The smell was bad enough before," Keller said. Alex watched Shaylee look around. They were in an old first-floor restaurant. There were booths and countertops all charred black from the fires. Alex had always been surprised at the amount of buildings still standing in dead zones, but that was in the air. On the ground, there were functional gravestones to the world that was. "Shaylee, this is Hollis Keller. He's a mercenary or bounty hunter, depending on the job," Alex said. "Not how I'd put it," Hollis said, extending a hand. Shaylee took it. "How would you put it?" she asked. "I murder people for money, unless the person I'm working for is stupid. Then I murder them because it's good for the world," Keller replied. "That's what you're doing out here, then?" Shaylee asked. Keller shrugged his shoulders and reached for the detonator on the ground. "Not sure yet. See, I was the one that brought Alex back to that camp outside New Purgatory. Was paid by Baruger to infiltrate your camp there and use the raiders to cause a little havoc. Ended up nabbing Alex and all the excitement. On the way back, he convinced me to help him, so now I'm here." "Taking me to Baruger might have been a bigger bonus," Alex noted. "Or he might have had me killed afterwards. Keep things hush-hush." "No, it worked out better this way, I think," Hollis replied. "Wait, so all those people at the compound, you killed them?" Shaylee asked. Alex brought a hand up to his forehead. It was a story he had neglected to tell her before they came to find Hollis. Keller was hired to lure members of the Sentinels out, likely to kill them, but Beruger didn't expect he'd find me in the trap. In the assault, Hollis got the better of me and put me in a cell. We worked out a deal, Alex explained. And I didn't kill anyone. The raiders I trained did, along with a bit of the munitions supplied by Beruger. Now, I'm not one for patriotism, but Alex said a few things that got me thinking. Besides, anyone with his gall might be worth following. That, and I wouldn't prefer to end up like a fucking toaster. So instead of taking Alex to Beruger, I decided to fuck with the man who'd have likely fucked with me. Keller tossed the detonator over to Shaley, who looked at it, then out one of the windows towards Beruger's harbor base. Can we trust him? Shaley said towards Alex. Nope, Alex replied. Shaley turned back towards Hollis, and he was smiling. You ever kicked a beehive before, Ferris? You press that button and you'll see what that looks like. Shaley looked once more at Alex, and he gave her a nod. She pressed down on the detonator. The explosion hit loudly. Debris flew and smashed into their building. Warm air and smoke clouded the sky in their lungs. Shaley and Alex had hit the ground, but Keller stared up at the blast. The heavy wind didn't bother him, and the shrapnel never touched him. In a few moments, it was over. Alex forced his body up and then reached for Shaley's arm to help her stand. Hollis had made his way outside. Alex and Shaley climbed out one of the windows and stood beside the bounty hunter. The parking lot of the harbor, and most of the warehouse, was now a molten crater. Alex had never seen wired explosives do that before. It reminded him of the Cloudbreaker substation erupting back in New Purgatory, except this looked like a volcano had gone off. Beruger gave me some toys to hunt with, but I never used them. Plasma bombs. Work like C4, burn worse than napalm, Keller explained. Alex didn't need a reply. The molten shrapnel was eating through asphalt and setting the harbor on fire despite the heavy rainfall. Fear wasn't running through his mind, though. It was opportunity. Hope you have more of those, Alex said, bending down to a small glob of molten fire and lighting up yet another cigarette. We can talk about that later. Right now we have some friends who might want a word, Hollis said, running behind an overturned truck. Alex caught Shaley running after him, but he couldn't see where they were coming from. There was still too much smoke. Beyond it, however, he could make out red bulbous fire moving towards him. They carried no weapons, but simply walked ever forward. Then Alex caught a clear sight. They were Beruger's augmented soldiers, covered in molten fire, yet still alive. Shit, Alex said to himself as he heaved up his rifle and popped the clip back in. He fired several rounds into the necks of the three he could see. They dropped immediately. The damage they had already sustained was severe. They just needed to be pushed a little more. Alex heard Shaley shout something he couldn't make out as he laid down more fire. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Then he heard a familiar sound, bullets flying past him. It was associated with hitting the ground. He dropped prone and checked what was left of the building's roof. Snipers? Another shot rang out and cut through the ground near his head. He rolled his body hard several times and pointed his rifle back to the roof. I hate being right. Alex picked himself up and ran for the cover Shaley and Keller were firing pot shots from. Shaley looked at Alex like a man that was mad, but Alex didn't have time to justify himself. Instead, he reloaded his rifle and blind fired over the top of the overturned truck. You got a plan here, Alex? Keller said as he fired the last round out of his pistol. Alex looked around and tried to get his bearings. The entire landscape was coated with smoke or on fire. All his sightlines were obscured. Do what you do best, Hollis. We'll cover you. Keller gave Alex a nod as the man rounded the bus. Alex fired up at the building, though he could hardly see his enemies through the smoke. When he ran out of ammo, he dropped down and reloaded. The firing from the troops on the building had stopped. Keller ran into the fiery ruins of the docking station. The augmented Marines were preoccupied with Alex's assault and had failed to notice him through the smoke. The explosives had left shards of exposed metal and glass everywhere. Even at full sprint, Hollis had to watch his footing for fear of twisting an ankle, or a boot coming down on an exposed post of steel. The open building had no operable stairs. Instead, Keller made for the rear exit that was beginning to catch fire. He needed to hurry. If the supports fell, he'd end up in an ashen graveyard of twisted metal and ocean spray. He couldn't find a ladder, but instead an old drain pipe that led right to the roof. Keller gave it a tug. The bottom half pulled apart from the building. Fuck. No way is this stable. The flames were drawing closer to him. Hollis had no choice, so he began his ascent one grasp at a time. The building was 10 meters tall to the roof, and with each bit he climbed, Keller could feel the pipe giving way. By the time Keller got to the roof, the pipe had fallen to the ground. Keller gave it a glance back and wondered how the hell he would get back down. That didn't matter now. First, he had to take care of the augmented Marines who were still raining fire down on Alex and Shaley. Keller reached for his short blades at his waist. Hollis ran full sprint to the first soldier and drove the right-handed blade into the lower spinal section, and then took the left blade and sliced it across the back of the neck. The soldier went off the roof as Keller retracted his blade. The other two soldiers turned from their assault towards the ground and towards Keller. Keller didn't give them a chance to fire. He threw his right blade and watched it spin and sail in the air. The augmented soldier did not move, and the blade sank deep in his face. Hollis threw his other blade at the next soldier, but it had learned. It reached up and snatched the blade in the air. Not bad, Hollis said aloud. The soldier extended the blade out. Keller could feel his boots warming from the flames catching on the roof. Hollis sprinted for the blade in the fallen soldier's face. The living soldier rushed in and slashed at him, but Hollis rolled under his attack, grabbed his other blade and slashed backwards, but the blow was deflected. Hollis rolled again and stood. The soldier tried thrusting again. Now Hollis could feel the fire. It was too hot to stand on the roof any longer. He could hear steel beginning to buckle. Keller gave a glance towards the ground. There was nothing to break his fall. Crack my skull or burn to death. Keller switched his handhold on the blade and ran for the soldier. The soldier attempted to slash, but Keller knocked it away with his own blade and then drove it into the soldier's collarbone, struggling with him. Keller twisted the blade, but the soldier felt nothing. Keller pulled the blade out and continued to stab, but the soldier fought back, trying to push the bounty hunter away. Keller knew there was only one option left. Alex and Shaley watched from afar as Keller struggled with the soldier. Alex was trying to line up a shot, but instead saw the pair fall. Flame shot up from the roof and the building began to crumble. Alex ran towards the dust, smoke, and fire kicking up into the air. He covered his face, knowing that one misstep could put his foot in molten fire. But he knew that Hollis would need his help. "Alex!" He could hear Shaley yell, but he ignored her. He started looking through the debris, but the smoke was so thick he could hardly see in front of his face. "Hollis! Hollis, where the hell?" Alex stopped when he saw a hand sticking out of a pile of rubble. A blade was lying next to it. "Oh, shit," Alex said. Shaley ran up beside him, her face covered in her torn jacket. Alex started digging through the rubble, but when he got to the person's face, he saw that it wasn't Hollis. Alex stood back up and brushed his hands off on his pants. The crackling fires and the building falling apart muffled all the noise. They tried looking around, but it was useless. The pair made their way out of the wreckage just outside of Keller's camp. The rain had stopped and the fog was rolling in. The fires were starting to die down. Alex was sitting on some old broken steps, watching the smoke and fog mix. Shaley stood next to him with an arm on his shoulder. "A few days into a new adventure and someone's already dead. Great fucking way to start," Alex said. "Alex, how long are we going to stay here? We need to move on before someone comes to check on these fires." Alex nodded his head. "Yeah, there's some more shit that needs to be done before that." "We don't have the time, Alex, especially not after this. Those attacks were unsanctioned. We're going to cause huge problems in Jerusalem." Shaley's voice trailed off as Alex looked up at her. "I don't give a fuck about Jerusalem or the counselors," Alex growled. "Then you need to start because that's where I'm taking you," Shaley replied. "Why?" "Janet, the council is the only way to get to Berlin, but this was the kind of shit she was worried about. If this gets back to Jerusalem..." Alex reached for his rifle and got to his feet, aiming towards the fog. "You hear that?" he asked. Shaley lifted her rifle. A figure was lumbering towards them, his clothes charred and his body scarred. He carried one blade at his side and had new slashes across his face to complement his old ones. It was Hollis. Alex had no fucking idea how the man had survived or how he was able to walk under his own power, but here he was, putting one foot after the other. Shaylee and Alex rushed over to him. They carried him over to the steps and laid him down. Shit, Hollis said aloud. I prefer my meat medium rare. Regardless of levity, Alex knew Hollis was in bad shape. His skin was badly reddened and nearly burnt, and his clothes were just about gone. Shaylee, Alex said. I can't fucking believe it, she replied. His skin is a little cooked, but it's nothing that won't heal on its own. I'll wrap up what I can. Hollis, does anything feel broken? The building. Lost one of my knives on the way down. This one? Alex said, as he held it up before placing it on Keller's stomach. Let's get him inside and get him settled. I'll go back for the bird. Shaylee thought time was drawing out like a razor going over her skin. She checked the digital watch on her wrist. 15 minutes had passed, yet it felt like an hour. She did what she could for Hollis, drenching one of his coats in chilly cold water and draping it over the redness that covered his body. He tried to speak, and though Shaylee loathed the man for what he was, she didn't want to see him die. Hey, Hollis, try to stay awake, all right? There might be other parts of you that are injured that I don't see. Yeah, hard to sleep when your body feels deep fried. Asshole. Shaylee decided she wouldn't let it get to her. She figured now was as good a time as ever to find out more about him. So why do you do it? Why do you kill people for money? Why change allegiances so easily? Keller laughed, then coughed. He didn't have another smart remark for his condition. Shaylee wondered if the damage had sobered him at all. You mind if I ask you first, Doc? Why do you fix killers, brave people, people you hate, people you don't even know but are quick to judge? And don't bullshit me with that medical oath either. I've known sawbones that have killed more people than me. Shaylee shook her head and let out a sigh. I did it because I needed the skill to survive. I didn't want to stay in New Purgatory, even though I'm trying to defend it now. Maybe I wanted to help people at one point, but now I have a cause. That's all anyone can hope for, I think. That's what we try to do, what we're good at. Matters. I do it to be a part of something, not because I can. Shaylee didn't want to look at Hollis. She looked down at her hands. She knew she was an idealist. That was why she had been so drawn to Alexander and what he had done and what his goals were. She believed people like Hollis found that idealism foolish, and for that she was embarrassed. Yeah, I get that, Hollis finally said. Shaylee was surprised. He had listened and agreed. It seemed strange to her. She looked up and over at Hollis, who still had his eyes closed. So what about you? Shaylee asked. It's a story you already seem to know well. I'll tell you and only you. Survival matters more than anything in this world. Causes, factions, those things I'll never understand. But if it means I get to see another day, I'll take the advantage. I work for Baruger, saw the kind of man he was, what he does to people, and I've seen what kind of man Alex is. They're similar in some ways. Both believe they're doing what's right for the world. One wants to make the world in his image and dominates those who get in his way. The other wants to change it, but wishes he didn't have to sacrifice to do it. It's war, same as any. Difference is Baruger doesn't care who dies. Alex does. I find looking for meaning at the end of a gun distasteful. There's no cause or speech great enough that justifies slaughtering a room full of children. But some people think there are. Fighting a war for peace is like cutting the petals off a flower and hoping they'll grow back better. Only issue is how big this conflict has become, and I'm smart enough to see a whirlwind I know I can't get out of the way of, Hollis explained. Why fight at all if you believe in none of this? Shaylee asked. Someone needs to hold the shears to that flower, Shaylee. Someone needs to walk into that room full of children. You talk about finding purpose. Well, that's mine. That's how you justify it? Purpose? You're just a killer for hire, hoping you pick the right side? I'm just keeping myself alive the only way I know how to. Just like you will. Or I'll be dead. There's no happy conclusion for a world like this, or for people like me. Win, lose, or draw. Shaylee set a hand on Hollis's shoulder. I see an ending and it's good, but maybe I just see it in a different light than you do.
Hollis laughed and coughed again. Hope you're right. Would be nice to hope for something more than a day where I didn't have to kill somebody. The sound of an engine roaring above the wind cut through the silence that bookended their conversation. Shaley helped Hollis to his feet, and they made way for the hell chopper. Shaley hoped her newfound understanding would help what she had to face next. Alex was quiet when his crew got on board. He helped Shaley finish examining Keller. They determined they could put him out with some anesthetic. Now they were back up in the air, but Alex hadn't set a flight for Jerusalem. I know that's where she wants me to go, Shaley, but I need to make one last stop before we leave. What about Dellen's daughter? I sent her a message. She knows her problem is taken care of. Only one more left here for me to rectify. Pinpricks of cold stabbing down every 4 or 5 seconds. That's how the rain ends in London. Alex had stopped at the college gardens. The place had become a mass grave to rovers and English alike. This was where Dellen had made his hideout, where he survived for 4 years after he and Jack Newsom failed in their attempt to kill John Morrison. This should have been where he died, Alex said aloud. Old Dell. Alex walked the unmaintained grounds. The old medic had been a walking case of guilt and shame. Unlike some of the other members of the Crusaders, Dellen hated what he did, and hated Jack Newsom even more for the way he openly lied to achieve his own goals. He had hated himself for following Jack's orders, for not coming to help London's refugees sooner, and most of all, for not dying with his countrymen when the bombs fell. That hatred and guilt was never more apparent than when Dellen spoke with Jack. He knew there was more to that story. He knew it had died with both men, and the rest of the original team. Alex saw Dellen as a counterbalance to everything Newsom had taught him, and when he died, Alex felt like he'd lost more than another mentor. He felt like he'd lost a friend, a father. There were decomposed bodies of fallen rovers and Morrison soldiers still wrapped up in their armor. No one bothered with them, and why would they? Alex saw his true destination. One large patch of well-maintained green amongst the drab, broken gray. Wooden crosses struck up every 2 feet, each with engraved names. At the center of them all was Dellen Johnston's. Alex kneeled at the gravestone and wished he still had the man's dog tags, but that memory was better left to his daughter, not he. He stared at the gravestone and read its writing. Dellen Johnston, Bones, father, doctor, soldier. We'll all end up that way sometime, Alex said aloud, not really knowing why. You tried with me, Dellen, but we both know which old man won that battle. Jack knew that kindness and manipulation could be 2 faces of the same coin. I can't stop the changes he put on me, because in the end they worked. I'm just sorry you're not here to talk some sense into my head. I just hope you know some of what you taught me did win out in the end. Alex paused for a few moments, reliving the events of the past year in his head. We all have a price to pay, old friend. I know that mine is steadily approaching. This time I'll meet it head on. Rest in peace, Dell. Beruger sat in his office chair. Today he had opened the windows to allow sunlight into his lab. The dome-shaped roof's metal cylinders lowered to beneath his sight, and the sun showered upon dust and old papers. Beruger thought it was a remarkable sight, and just before the sun, the skyline of Berlin. The city he had saved. A city that not only survived the war, but had thrived despite it. Now that accomplishment felt like nothing under the new sun. His reach was exceeding his grasp. The other nations would not listen to him. He counted himself lucky that his government hadn't decided to toss him aside as well. Computer, begin log, Beruger said aloud. Date November 13th, 2037. Plans of fragile ideas men lay out on paper. We put this formality in place because it allowed us to feel prepared, but the reality is that what we plan is more guideline than formula. I've discovered this over the course of a year. Indeed, it has been the only project of scientific relevance I've been experimenting with within that time span. I've witnessed a son fail a father. I've seen betrayal destroy the fabric of relationships, and I've watched what one man and several dedicated individuals can do when they will, instead of think. An American once said, that what a person wills and not what they know determines their worth or unworth, power or impotence, happiness or unhappiness. There were many years I thought that this was nonsense. Perhaps I still do. But like any hypothesis, once it is put to the test and consistently proven, the only outcome is theory. The theory of the Crusaders or Sentinels or whatever name they wish to refer to themselves as seems to be one of impossible odds. Those odds, however, do not erase empirical evidence. They are street thugs, common criminals, relics from the old world. Assassins, bounty hunters, mercenaries, the lost, the forgotten, the damned. They have inflicted more change upon this world in 1 year than I have done in my entire life. For all my knowledge, for all my accomplishments, I have the misfortune of witnessing the paradigm shift.
Beruger stopped and reached for a mug at his desk. He took a sip of the tea inside of it. Bitter, steeped too long and nearly cold.
The war provided opportunity, the chance to rebuild the world anew. I expected it, predicted it, and I awaited it. This was a chance to eliminate all hostilities from the past. The world would be purged of blood feuds, weapons of mass destruction, trade wars, and the stifling of progress. Instead of dystopia, I could bring the world to utopia, and Earth would rise from the nuclear ashes and glass to become something better. But the plans fail. They always fail.
Beruger heard footsteps behind him. He knew it was Mikhail Koslov, returned from the United Kingdom Deadzone and awaiting new orders.
They fail because plans never take into consideration the ever-flawed human spirit, the human will, for those who work the plan and those who would stand against it. End log, November 13th, 2037. Mikhail, you've returned,
Beruger said. Alexander Velasco has returned.
Yes, I know. We'll attend to your failure.
Beruger was typing at his computer. Mikhail stood off to the side and clenched his head in his hands.
No. Do you feel that, Mikhail? Do you feel the pain radiating throughout your body?
Mikhail fell to his knees. He couldn't let go of his head. Thoughts and dreams felt like they were dripping like blood from his ears. No matter what he did, he couldn't stop the exodus.
You must remember this pain, Mikhail. This pain worse than death. If you cannot kill Velasco, you might as well be killed by him, for if you fail again, I will take everything from you. I will ensure you spend your days in service to me with the guilt of all you have done. You will take life with all the regret, but none of the control. You will beg me to return you to the shadow, and I will deny you even in your most frail moments.
The drainage stopped. Mikhail's hands fell to the floor to stabilize himself. He was panting. The toll was taxing on his body.
That is only if you fail me again, Mikhail. Alexander Velasco, how did he best you?
Disarmed me. Didn't kill me.
Yet he had every chance to. Tell me, Mikhail, he was your friend? Why would he do that? Why would he spare the man that murdered his lover?
Because he is stronger than your mind games. Because I saved his life once. Mikhail spat. Beruger shook his head.
Come now. Defiance is beneath you. Tell me the truth, Koslov, or I'll continue with this petty exercise.
Mikhail forced himself to his feet. The downside of having regained his memories was that the database no longer blocked out the pain in his old bones. Every scar, every bullet, he could feel and recall just as he could recall his wedding day in childhood. He wanted it gone. He bested me, and for all the pain we have caused, he is not me. I was his friend, so he would not kill me in cold blood. Instead, he wished to break me, and perhaps to break you. He wanted you to see your best weapon defeated.
He is a foolish idealist, Mikhail. He hoped to turn you against me. He threatened you with my ability to end your existence, did he not?
He warned me that you would kill me when you were finished with me. Is he right? Mikhail asked.
Velasco paints anyone that isn't himself as a villain. Look at what I've given you, Mikhail. Your memories, your life. I've even considered taking them away because they pain you so much. You're my best agent, and unless you give me a reason, why would I kill you? All I ask for is obedience,
Beruger said. Mikhail had no reply. but he knew Alex had spared him for a reason. The man was either weak and couldn't kill an old friend, or he had been trying to prove a point.
Alexander wanted to make you feel weak. He wanted you to think that killing in cold blood makes you a lesser man, that he is superior to you. But those are lies, Mikhail. Velasco is afraid of you and afraid of me. He wants no part of what is to come. That is why he left you alive. He hopes we will spare him if he remains on the fringe,
Beruger explained. He won't remain there, Thomas. His old team won't let him, nor will his memory. We ruined that. I ruined that.
When I had you kill Lansfield, I knew it would hurt him. Do you believe it drove him over the edge?
Beruger asked. I cared for many people before I killed my country, but nothing can hurt more than knowing I lost my wife. Alex's reason for fighting was justice, but it has become Layla. We took her away from him, and because of that he seeks revenge.
A fair assessment, Mikhail, but he didn't kill you. He is afraid of the repercussions, or it's out of some misguided sense of kinship that he has with you.
You are not giving Alexander enough credit, Thomas. He is smart. There is something larger at play here. Another reason he has spared my life.
You think too highly of him. Velasco is out of moves. The base in Newcastle was expendable, but Velasco can't keep up strikes like these alone. The council gave us time to recover, so I don't care what New Purgatory tries. They will never gain total support from the council. And if they grow frustrated and back Velasco, they'll violate the peace treaty. From all sides it appears to be a stalemate, Mikhail. But the reality is that we have the advantage. Velasco is lost, emotionally dead. With him gone, we pick the others off. Once the heroes of New Purgatory are dead, the nation will fall all.
So we wage a war in the shadows against each other, Mikhail replied.
So we do. Luckily, I have a shadow. Now we need to talk about your next mission.
Alex sat and backtracked through both his and Jack's journal. He figured since he was back in the fray, he needed to look for holes in his enemies and old allies. If anything, it would provide him with a refresher on the world's events. John Morrison was dead, murdered by the Crusaders in his own tower. Egypt and Japan had joined the council, while China had been forcibly removed. Talia Shazari, Gajil, and Sam Gates had been killed in Beijing. The newly formed Sentinels had stopped Thomas Beruger's attempted invasion of New Purgatory, if you could call it that. And Mikhail killed Layla because you weren't fast enough to save her. You let her die while you played hero. How could he forget? Alex had spent the last half year trying to forget, but now he had some solace. Still, every night was anger, fear, sadness, drenched sheets, ice in his chest, and bloodied knuckles. Success didn't come without failure, but Alex would have rather died than let Layla bleed out on the cold floor with the warm glow of a reactor shining on her face. It had broken him. He hadn't even stayed for the ceremony. Janet had planned all of that. And the few times Alex had reached out, Janet had told him it was lovely. Flowers, music, and drinking. And everything Layla would have loved. She had also tried to convince him to return, that they could do it again just for him. But he spurned her every time. It had been months at least since his last transmission. Sending Ferris instead of Vixer was an interesting choice. If it had been him, he would have played the fellow victim card. But Janet wanted to use the sympathetic medic with a crush on him. There was no secret that Shaylee admired him. It was also no secret that she had not trusted or even liked him when they first met in Old Cairo. But Alex had won her over. Now she trusted him, even if she didn't like the choices he made. He felt he had proven his goals to her. It wasn't enough to just kill. Not like how he had when he began with Morrison's soldiers. No, there was a level of organization, an endgame to adhere to. Alex exposed his team to that and showed them what the cost of it was. They paid the price once, and Alex would continue to pay it. Alex knew men like Tyrese saw the deaths of Gates, Gajil, and Talia as empty. Alex knew differently. He had been exposed to what war was. Tyrese was just a man playing at it. Those allies, friends even, had given their lives in service to a greater goal. An empty death was Layla, stabbed by someone she trusted. Alex hoped Shaylee saw the plan and the pain that came with it. He knew he was a killer. He didn't see himself as a revolutionary so many painted him as. At least not anymore. Even if he was, he knew no revolution would come without blood, especially the blood of those closest to the revolutionaries. He let out a sigh and peered into the older passages of his journal. Those times of ignorance and idealism were packed with truths that turned out to be lies after exploitation by a war. The only truths from that time he needed were that John Morrison was dead, and though Thomas Beruger had hurt Alex personally, the world was in a better place than it had been 6 months ago. The Council was no longer ignoring the inhumanities afflicted by one of their own, and the dead zones were receiving aid instead of being inconvenient realities rarely brought up in conversation. All steps in the right direction, save one. Thomas Beruger. The man needed to be deposed at the least, assassinated at the most. That was another issue entirely. Jack Newsom had left Alex some groundwork to establish the New World, to attain allies, but now he needed to make use of them, and the old man's journals had ended before he got to that point. The burden and decisions rested on Alex now. He had to plot the next move. An invasion of Berlin. What else is there? We took down a tower. We infiltrated Beijing. But invading Berlin? We stopped one cloudbreaker nation, but this. He rubbed his temples and looked for a smoke in his jacket. Keller was asleep, likely from the amount of morphine Shaley had shot into his veins. Alex changed his mind and decided he'd have a few words with her.
Who taught you to fly? Alex asked as he strode into the cockpit. I picked up a few lessons in New Purgatory. After the attack, I spent every spare moment outside the morgue in a bird. It was either that or volunteering. You didn't partake in the famous New Purgatory nightlife? Alex asked. When you live in a Lonsfo's bar, that sort of thing loses its appeal, Alex. I can understand that. We all need our distractions, Shaley said. You wouldn't recognize Janet. Embrace leadership, became responsible, even cut the long hair. Bullshit, Alex replied. It's still long, just more manageable now. I guess that helps when you're general, mechanic, and weaponsmith. Helps to keep it all out of the way. If there had been no Alexander Velasco, then Janet Trishella would have taken that on. The tower, everything. And she would have done an outstanding job at it based on what she's doing now. Maybe you should tell her that when you see her, Shaley said. Maybe, Alex said, staring off beyond the cockpit. As professional as Janet is now, she kept the glasses. Still kicks her feet up on the bar, too. But sometimes she even listens to Tyrese. So he did end up taking on that ambassador role. I'm glad. Part of me was worried he would stay back in New Purgatory, following my example. He's not like you, Alex. Tyrese isn't a soldier, he's a historian. But I think you already knew that. He's been doing some excellent work in Jerusalem. More than he could have by joining the military. Sometimes I wish I had made the same choice. Why didn't you? Alex asked. Because I knew you'd come back, and a sick part of me would hope if I stayed, you'd be proud of me for not running the first chance I got, Shaley answered. She said it like it was a matter of fact, as if she had thought about it so many times that it didn't mean anything to her anymore. It was a level of dissonance Alex was all too familiar with. The things we hold so important end up not mattering eventually. Usually because they're never what we expected. I wanted him there, Alex finally said. He's idealistic, more than I ever was. But on the battlefield, idealism means nothing. He saw that. Now he's on the council. He can make moves, but he'll never forget what he saw. He'll never forget about the people who got him there. You sound like you envy him, Shaley noted. I do. He reminds me a lot of my old friend Elias, with some key differences. War didn't change his ideas, but they changed his perception on how his ideas must be achieved. The killing, the ruthlessness that this world experiences every day. He never liked that, but now he understands why it exists. It's inevitable. That's reason enough to work for the changes to eliminate that brutality. You think he can help us avoid another war? Alex didn't answer immediately. He had no idea if Shaley was on his side for what he had planned for Beruger. He was heading for another conflict, one that could spark a war. He wouldn't let Tyrese or Janet or anyone stop it. But he had to hide those cards for now. It doesn't matter whose side she's on. She's going to find out. No, I'm hoping he's going to help me start one. The last one any of us will have to fight. Beruger, Shaley said. Is that what you really want? You mean, is that the right choice? Is it? What do you want me to say, Shaley? That I don't feel a need for revenge? I do, but you and I both know that it doesn't have our best interest at heart.
If what you told me about Mikhail is true, then he's waging a shadow war by assassination, and he won't stop until New Purgatory is back in his hands. Okay, I can understand that, but what if the Council doesn't? They could sanction New Purgatory. They could label you a terrorist again if you try to start a war on your own, Shaylee replied. It won't come to that. His attack on New Purgatory was brazen. Australia won't maintain its neutrality like they did with Morrison. Attacking a council nation is different than attacking your own people. That's bullshit, Alex. They didn't attack you when you went after China. Call it the Rangers extending a professional courtesy, considering they murdered one of my friends and did nothing while one of their best agents died in Morrison's tower. Not one from that day is alive but us, so if the Rangers wanted to expose what I did in China, they would have done it already. Okay, then what about the other nations? Jerusalem won't be able to cover for Berlin for long, despite what Bernard says he believes about maintaining peace. Maybe there's old hatreds we can play off there. Well, for what it's worth, I hope you're right, Shaylee replied. If I'm not, we're in for a hell of a lot of trouble. Beruger wants control of the council, and with what he can do with those augmented soldiers, Alex trailed. I don't really want to think about it. You're right, Shaylee interrupted. I don't want to think about it. How far are we from Jerusalem? Shouldn't be too long. I took us over the Mediterranean to avoid the heart of Europe, Shaylee replied. Yeah, I suppose the last thing we want is to be... A flashing red light and siren cut Alex off. Shaylee? Alex yelled out. 3 hell choppers on our rear. Shit, Alex, they're firing. He felt hopeless. There was nothing he could do to control the situation. Shaylee rolled the bird to its right. Alex held onto a crossbar above his to keep from losing his footing. Bright flashes shot out in front of the hell chopper and exploded. Too close, Shaylee exhaled. She dove the bird down toward the ocean. 3 hell choppers at the rear followed closely behind. I hope you have a plan, Alex spat. Just one. The two watched as the hell choppers came close to the ocean water. Shaylee flicked the switch on the stick and fired off a rocket, then pulled up hard. A wave of ocean water shot up into the air, following the rear of Alex's bird. The 3 birds that followed were coated. The first 2 could not bear the weight and slammed into the ocean, but the third pulled up and gave chase. Okay, I'm out of ideas now, Shaylee said, panicked. Alex looked around at the console. He knew they could not turn to face, even if this hell chopper was more agile than most. Evade him. I have an idea. Alex made for where Keller was resting. He grabbed at the straps and carabiners and locked the bounty hunter to the siding. Then Alex made for the loading ramp and locked himself into place. He reached for the gun racks and grabbed his rifle. Shaylee, Alex said over the comm. Open the ramp. What? Just do it. A second later, the ramp began to descend, and Alex was slapped by water and frigid air rushing past him. The bright light of the trailing chopper blinded him, but he lifted his rifle and fired anyway. He couldn't tell if his barrage was hitting its mark. He was having a hard enough time just standing and fighting the wind. When his clip went dry, he tried to focus on the enemy. He had nicked some spots on their canopy, but it hadn't been enough. The enemy bird was firing now, but Shaylee juked, nearly throwing Alex to the steel grating. He would have ended up in the ocean had he not been strapped in. Desperately, he looked back over at Keller, but the man was still out cold, his hands resting on his bandolier. Bandolier. Grenades, Alex yelled aloud. He knew he had to unstrap himself to get to them. He grabbed at the holding bar above his head and reached for his parang. Alex cut himself free of the strap and pulled up. The wind had control of his legs now, making them resist as he pulled himself closer to where Keller lay. Then the sound of machine gun fire rang out again. As Shaylee juked right, Alex's legs and back crashed into the siding. He cried out but knew he had to hold on. Finally, as he neared Keller, he let his body drop and grabbed onto the strap, keeping Hollis from flying out like so much old cargo. Alex took 3 stinger grenades and tried to figure out how he could throw them and still survive. He had no choice but to let go of the strap. The wind pulled him towards the ramp, but he fought back and pulled the pin on the first grenade. He tossed it, but it exploded just short of the bird. The wind pulled him harder and closer to the edge now. Alex threw another with no success. He knew now he only had one option. He let the wind take him. He forced himself to slam against the siding and gun rack and held on. He grabbed the flare gun that rested between rifles. Alex aimed as best he could. He was freezing and covered in rain, but he would not let the shaking in his arms deter him. Alex fired. The red-orange light shot off and slammed into the canopy of the other hellchopper. The bird juked left and right. The pilot was blinded. Alex waited as the bird bobbed back and forth. When it came close, he tossed his final grenade. The stinger caught the chopper on the nose, and the metal shrap cut through the canopy, sending it dive-bombing towards the ocean. Shaylee, we're clear. Close the damn hatch. As the ramp came up, the wind stopped blowing and Alex was able to regain his footing, but his entire body was numb. He forced himself to walk back up to the cockpit. Jesus, Alex, are you okay? I've been better. Warmer, he replied. How? Flare gun. Grenade. Part of Alex wished that it had been Layla flying. He knew she would have been able to escape the birds easily, but there was no point in telling Shaylee that. She was just trying to get them away. Go get yourself warm, Alex. I'll keep things handled up here unless I need you to kill anyone with a flare gun again. Alex smiled, though his teeth were chittering, and made his way back into the hold. Alex struggled to get warm. He had torn off his now wet clothes and wrapped himself in a reflective blanket. He wanted to smoke, but that wouldn't happen until they reached Jerusalem. Keller had finally stirred from his sleep. Despite explosions and flesh wounds, the man was remarkably durable. Ugh. What did I miss? The merc asked. I went for a swim, Alex replied, trying to stop the chattering in his teeth. How was the water? Fuck you, Keller. Keller cut out a laugh and looked for his own pack of smokes, then got up and gave one to Alex. Thanks. No problem, the hunter groaned as he sat on the metal flooring. How the hell are you moving? Alex asked as he stoked up the cigarette with a match Keller provided him. How the hell are you still breathing? Alex shook his head. They're hunting us now. Trying to do it where we won't be found. I figured. Made a lot of racket losing them. I figured this old bird to be faster than the regular ones. Not enough to escape an interception like that. They knew where we were heading. You're saying we're behind schedule? Keller asked. No, we're right on time, Alex replied as he breathed in a long drag and let it out slow. Answer me something, Keller. How the hell did you know I'd be in London and heading for the same base you were trying to destroy? I guessed, Keller said short. Bullshit. Beruger might have leaked your story out a bit, maybe to make you angry, maybe to make you seem unstable, mostly to absolve himself by claiming his people had nothing to do with that invasion back in New Purgatory. All nonsense, which is why he still got his country slapped with sanctions. But news ran with it for a while. They would say something about the incursion being led by a rogue element in your organization. The same rogue element that killed English national Layla Lansfield. Beruger claimed it was proof enough that your fragile alliances could only lead to anarchy. Same old political BS. So you guessed I went to London to mourn. If you'd prefer, just call it Providence. That might make you feel better. Of course, I figured you'd come find me if German bases started exploding around the globe. But yeah, I know a thing or two about grief. I'm over my grief. Don't waste your time with words, Alex. I've seen how you act. All the proof I need as far as I'm concerned, Keller replied. Alex took another long drag. There is a time I try to convince you otherwise. You make it sound like you could. I have before. Maybe with money. Powerful motivator, that. Now who's lying? You know how much you could have made if you took me to Beruger, but something I told you on the outskirts changed your mind, Alex asked. Hollis didn't answer straight away. Instead, he puffed on his cigarette and looked straight on the metal siding in front of him. Alex wasn't sure if the man was thinking or ignoring him. I knew who you were and what you did to powerful people. Dictators, tyrants, and their like. Yeah, I could have killed you or brought you to Beruger, but why? You've got a purpose, one you're still trying to fulfill. Besides, I like to kill and raise hell, but I like to do it on my own terms. I'm smart enough to recognize what the world would look like if Beruger had his way. There'd be no place for men like me. Doesn't mean I buy into your revolution or your rallying cries, but I see them for what they are. The world you want means I get to kick around a little longer, and that I can do what I do. That a good enough answer for you? Jaw's getting sore. It means I don't have to kill you, Alex said casually. Keller turned his head and stared at the man that was casually flicking ash onto the metal grating. Are you threatening me, Velasco? Just making things clear. With how Layla was murdered, well, I won't let that happen again. You should have never trusted that machine. Maybe not, but that's the same trust I'm extending to you. Understand? Keller let out a long sigh. Yeah, Alex, but be clear about this. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. Alex was done with the pissing contest. Fair enough. They sat there in silence for a few moments, huffing their smokes awkwardly. The silence finally broke when Shaylee's voice came over the bird's intercom. Alex, we're about 4 hours out. You warm enough to take over while I get some rest? Alex flicked a cigarette onto the ground and stood up, making for his damp clothes. Be up in a few minutes. Damp clothes didn't bother him. He was nowhere close to warm, but Alex had been used to that in his time alone. With the cold months picking up, he had begun to shelter in places like his old hideout in S4, blown-out buildings with no insulation. But he wasn't worried about that now. Jerusalem would still be hotter than hell. Shaylee snored lightly behind him. Alex let the autopilot do most of the work. They were only a few hours out now. All he wanted was a real shower compared to the creeks and ponds he'd been bathing in for the last few months. And a drink. Been a while since I had a good shot of, well, anything really. Yeah, that's what you need. Make sure people really think you've turned into Jack. It's just one. You deserve it. You put Layla to rest and behind you. It's normal. Anyone who's gone through shit you have can stomach a drink or two. What will it hurt? My friendships, my alliances, how people perceive me. Fuck knows I could walk into a bar and be recognized by everyone in the damn place, either as a terrorist or a hero. He let out a sigh and heard stirring from behind him. Shaylee must have heard him and was waking up. Rising stars, Alex said. Not close enough to morning yet. I'll take a few hours. Better than nothing, Shaylee replied as she looked down at her watch. Are you doing all right? Alex started to worry. He hoped she hadn't heard him talking to himself. It wasn't like he was trying to troubleshoot cleaning his gun and running through the steps. That depends on what you're asking about, Alex said. Let's start with your clothes. Alex felt relieved. It'll be warm soon enough. How'd you sleep? Well enough for it being on a chair. I've slept in worse places lately, Shaylee answered. Don't I know it, Alex replied. Can I ask you something else? Not like I can run away if you do. Why didn't you tell Janet what you needed to do? She would have helped, you know. Janet can't help me anymore, Shaylee. What I had to do alone. No one else can walk that path for me. If you asked her, she'd say the same thing. Shit, she knows better than anyone. I don't understand. How much do you know about Janet, Shaylee? I mean, not just the stories Tyrese likes to weave about the Crusaders. I mean from before that. Nothing? Her and I don't often have a chance to talk. Last time we did, it was when Vixer volunteered me for her squad. If you get a chance, buy her a drink, Alex said. Before the Crusaders, she led a interesting life. Spent a lot of time out in the wastes honing her abilities, but also searching. Looking for a way to put old ghosts to rest, or to find out more about them. And she came to us and found a whole new purpose. Except you're doing it in reverse, Shaylee noted. You might see it that way, but something had to happen to make Janet decide to leave New Purgatory. It was her father. He died in Jack Newsom's first attempt on the tower. Jack did what he could to raise her. Sure, that's where all the defiance came from. So your running off was doing the same thing? You were trying to put Layla to rest? Alex spun his chair around to look at Shaylee. His eyes were tired, nowhere near as intimidating as she had remembered when they first met in the arena. Yeah, Shaylee. That didn't come until later, as you saw, but I had to come to terms with her being gone. Not sure I really have, though. If you always meant to go to London, why did you travel outside of New Purgatory's protected zones? Escape. I wanted to go as far as I could by using old maps and as much fuel as I could find. I was looking for an escape. More than one, I suppose. Why? Shaylee asked. Remember Gates? Sure. Gates explained something to me once. He said we were both survivors, but what we survived made us different. For me, it's been war, bullets, uprisings, and revolution. For Sam, it was struggling to eat, to stay out of the sun, to keep moving from shelter to shelter, not knowing what resources he might find. I've survived harm's way that I put myself in front of. He survived because he didn't have a choice. Gates lived a life because of the old war, not despite the new one. I suppose I wanted to see things from his point of view. Do you think that helped? Shaylee asked. I think problems don't go away just because you run from them. You just run into more problems to stack on top of the old ones. I couldn't forget what I left behind here, or what happened. That's why I was always going to come back. To kill Baruger? Shaylee asked. Yeah, but also to keep New Purgatory safe. It's all I fought for, and it might be all I have left. I'll do whatever I have to do, Alex answered. And you don't care who gets in your way? Not Janet or the council or anyone? Does it seem that way to you, Shaylee? There was a short silence between them. I hope not. That's not the man I chose to follow. You chose to follow a murderer. No, Alex, I'm following a man who showed mercy in a place that had none. I'm following a person who, when faced with death, insulted its leader and still made her an ally. Someone who made me hope for more than just endless murder in this life. And I want to hope you're still that man. Even a small part of you. Alex didn't reply. It was nice to hear, but just because Shaylee complimented him didn't mean the past could just be erased. He had a goal, and whether the world wanted to follow along with him was not his concern. Revenge against Baruger filled his mind now. If he could just take that revenge, no matter the cost to himself, Layla's death would mean something, and his home would finally be safe.